This is Bloomberg Surveillance with Tom Keene and Paul Sweeney.
We're addicted to the parlor game, the Fed, the monetary ballet.
Where do you see opportunities in that fixed income space here in 24?
With Lisa Mateo on markets.
AI affecting demand for cloud computing.
And Michael Barr with news.
Another legal setback for Donald Trump, this time across the pond.
The best in economics, finance, investment, and international relations. This is Bloomberg Surveillance on Bloomberg Radio.
Good morning, everyone. Tom Keene, Paul Sweeney. An historic day for America. We wake up to a huge event of last evening. We'll have coverage for you all day. We'll go through that in a moment. We welcome all of you to Key Economic Data at 8:30. Markets earnings. Did you see what happened with Dell?
Yes.
When you slipped, wow.
Yeah, I'm looking at the stock here, Tom. Pre-market down 15%. The numbers kind of came in a little bit below expectations. Stock had more than doubled this year, Tom, so giving back a little bit this morning.
The shock of the speed of the conviction of the former president. We had to have meetings last night to say, okay, what do we do? We are going to bring you informed conversation. We're really going to avoid the punditry today and just try to go to experts. We start strong here in moments with Terry Haynes of Pangea. I just think wonderful. We are going to one of the major political economic professors of the country, Andy Rudovich of Bowdoin University. He is truly expert on the imperial presidency going back 40 years. And Paul, moments ago, we are honored that Nick Akerman of the Watergate prosecution with Leon Jaworski, we're thrilled that Nick Akerman will join us in the 9 o'clock hour.
Absolutely, Tom. So we'll have that angle covered. There's also a lot of economic data today, Tom. As you know, the PCE deflator data comes in at 8:30 Wall Street time. We'll have that. Bob Michael, Tom, CIO at JP Morgan Investment Management. I think we're going to have him in studio here for a couple of segments to help us think about where this economic data is taking us.
He'll get us to that key economic data. I want to point out David Gura will join us. He is at Trump Tower. He's been encyclopedic and fully read in on this. Again, our effort for you across the nation and worldwide is to give you important perspective on the path forward. The president speaking at 11 a.m.
Yeah, we're going to bring that to you live this morning with Alex Steele, Tom. So, again, a lot on the political front, a lot on the economic data front, and there's some earnings out there as well.
I thought we were going to Gura now.
No.
It's 7:30.
Nah, we'll leave him. He's not getting up.
He's over at the St. Regis, Astor Court.
Yep.
He's having the St. Regis, you're near Trump Tower.
Yep.
The Eggs Benedict.
Love it.
With the 1 ounce Russe Osteria caviar with Canadian bacon.
Of course.
$225.
I think Colin's got that.
I mean, I think there's for Gura's. We hope to see David Gura here at 7:30 after he's done with his St. Regis breakfast. It is the Interactive Broker Studios with your Bloomberg Business Flash, Lisa Mateo.
I just got hungry all of a sudden. Good morning. NASDAQ futures leading the losses right now, down 0.4%. And this after Dell disappointed. Dell shares down about 15%. Its first revenue increase since 2022, well, just wasn't enough to impress investors. They had some higher expectations for its AI server business. We have S&P futures down 0.2% or 15 points. Dow futures down 0.1% or 46 points. To the bond market, we have the 2-year yield 4.94%, up 1 basis point. The 10-year yield 4.56%, and that's up 1 basis point. Today, yes, all eyes on the core PCE deflator, which likely moderated in April to the slowest monthly pace yet this year. That comes out at 8:30 Wall Street time. We shall see. Now, in other news, UBS Group completed the historic acquisition of its former rival Credit Suisse. UBS ADRs are up about 2%. And over to HSBC, sources saying the firm aims to pick outgoing CEO Noel Quinn's successor by July. HSBC ADRs up about 0.1%. Some IPO news. Wall Street Journal reporting Bill Ackman planning to take his investment firm Pershing Square public as soon as next year. And finally, news of Donald Trump's guilty verdict. Pulled shares of Trump Media and Technology Group, the owner of Truth Social, lower. Right now it's down 4%. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom and Paul.
Lisa, thanks so much. Our goal today is to avoid the punditry going on nationwide and give you the facts forward again to where former President Trump speaks at 11 a.m. And we start strong with Terrence Haynes. He's with Pangea Policy. He has real-world Capitol Hill experience, and we're thrilled Terry Haynes could start us off this morning. Terry, what does a housewife do outside of Bucks County? They voted for President Biden last time. How does this historic moment for the nation change the thinking of an independent voter outside Philadelphia?
I think what it does is it makes that voter a tiny bit more likely to vote for somebody other than Trump. Let's put it that way. And that person, I think, is, ends up more than likely being Biden. I think the conviction is a small net negative for Trump's election chances, but also there's a pretty good possibility that whatever bump happens one way or the other is pretty ephemeral. You've got a lot of events coming up, including Trump's sentencing, the Republican National Convention, and of course, first the June 27th debate between Biden and Trump, which just became a bigger deal than it even was yesterday.
Is there a historic analog? Is there something you can reach back to? I think of Wendy Schiller at Brown University. Terry Haynes, can you look back and say this is somewhat like whatever?
No, no, I don't think so. It is uncharted waters in that sense. But we've been through a lot of presidential elections that were uncharted waters, and I can give you 1948 as a perfect example of that, where Truman looked like a gone goose, as Claire Booth Luce famously called him, and yet he won. So there are a lot of there have been a lot of presidential elections where things have slipped and slid.
What can Donald Trump learn from Harry S. Truman of Missouri?
He needs to be working hard to unite his party, harder than he is right now, and he needs message discipline above all. I think these are two lessons that the Biden people, frankly, know better than Trump at this point. And you've got a Republican Party that's split and still split, and you've got independents that are underwater for Trump. He needs both of those in order to win. Today, he doesn't have them.
Hey, Terry, looking through your notes here, I was taken by this comment here. The conviction makes it harder for Trump to attract serious financial and political backing from Wall Street and many other deep pockets. At the same time, Bloomberg News is running a big take story this morning that says Wall Street billionaires rush to back Trump, verdict be damned. How do you think this is going to play out? Because we've got people like Howard Lutnick and other folks like that, Steven Schwartzman lining up behind Trump despite what's happening here. How do you think that's going to play out?
I was pleased to anticipate the headline this morning, Paul, frankly. But aside from that, though, think about the people that you've cited, and I don't doubt it. I mean, some people will rush to back him. Some people are rushing to back him. Those people generally are either people who aren't in the public markets, right? The Ackmans of the world, let's say, or who have the ability to not really care what the public markets or shareholders think, but maybe like somebody like Schwartzman. But there are going to be an awful lot of Fortune's 500 CEOs, conversely, who are going to shy away because they don't want to have serious criticism from the shareholders, the media, or the broader public. So I think this cuts two ways.
Terry, how do you think the Biden administration, the Biden campaign should approach this verdict in the months ahead?
Well, I think they're doing two things, and both of them are politically necessary. One of them is to say the phrase convicted felon as much as possible. But at the same time, what they need to do, and frankly, what I think they're also doing, is trying to turn this into a referendum on November and exploit the weaknesses that I've already pointed out in the Trump campaign, both with registered Republicans and likely voter Republicans, as well as independents. They need to keep making the felony conviction and Trump's the high intensity of Trump and the Trump campaign, frankly, assets for them.
Terry, thank you so much. Terry Haynes with our beginning brief this morning in the 7 o'clock hour. He is with Pangea, and we look forward to comments from him in the coming days. Again, former President Trump to speak at 11 a.m. Futures at -15 with an update with our news from New York City. Michael Barr.
Thank you very much, Tom, Paul, Lisa. Donald Trump wasted no time raising money off of his felony criminal conviction in New York. The former president attended a fundraiser last night on the heels of the verdict in his hush money trial. And he's holding a news conference this morning at Trump Tower, as Tom mentioned. And we will carry that news conference live right here on Bloomberg. Trump was found guilty on all 34 counts of falsifying business records in his criminal hush money trial. The former president spoke to reporters after the verdict.
This was a disgrace. This was a rigged trial by a conflicted judge who was corrupt. It's a rigged trial, a disgrace.
Manhattan District Attorney Alvin Bragg says his office handled this case like they would any other, and he thanked the jury for their deliberations on the case.
Their deliberations led them to a unanimous conclusion beyond a reasonable doubt that the defendant, Donald J. Trump, is guilty of 34 counts of falsifying business records in the first degree to conceal a scheme to corrupt the 2016 election.
Sentencing will be July 11th, just days before the Republican National Convention. Both sides of the aisle are reacting to the Trump verdicts. Democratic Congressman Adam Schiff, who was the lead prosecutor in Trump's first impeachment trial, says Trump's conviction is an affirmation of the justice system.
He has really played rope-a-dope in the courts and gotten away with it until today. And I do think justice has finally caught up with Donald Trump.
Meanwhile, House Speaker Mike Johnson posted on X that, quote, "Today is a shameful day in American history." Other Republicans also reacted with fury. Ohio Senator J.D. Vance called the verdict a disgrace to the judicial system. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Michael Barr, and this is Bloomberg. Tom Pauly.
Michael Barr, thanks so much. At 8:30, key economic data. Paul Sweeney. I go to the yield space, not the equity space, to figure out what's going on. And the real yield, 2.19%. I guess over 48 hours has been quiescent, but the fact is yields elevated through this week and through the end of May.
They really have. I mean, I'm just looking at it kind of year to date. We started the real yield around 1.65%. Here we are, Tom, as you mentioned, 2.19%. So yields moving higher. I'm just looking at the 10-year Treasury here, 4.55%. And Tom, you can sit in your 2-year Treasury, get 4.93%. That's not too bad.
Should I look? I mean, I'm house looking this weekend. I mean, should I look at the bank rate 30-year fixed mortgage? I mean, I'm trying
it's coming down a little bit. I usually go MB30, and that kind of gets me there.
Oh, really?
Yeah, MB30.
You know how to do it quicker than me. 7.35%.
Boy, that's still.
And it's still high, but for that to break through to a new level, the news is that hasn't happened.
That hasn't happened. I'm looking to refinance my 6% mortgage, which I felt like a chump when I took that out because everybody else was sitting there at 3%. Even Matt Miller
has. Damian Sassower's at 1.5%.
Well, he's a player.
It is payable in Indonesia rupee.
Right, exactly right. So, but again, so we'll see. But a lot of folks, we're just not seeing. Look on the real estate front. You talk to real estate agents. Just there's nothing out there in terms of inventory because I'm not going to go out there and get into the mortgage market at 7%.
8:30 this morning, Jason Furman scheduled to be with us from Harvard University with the way he aggregates the inflation data in the PCE deflator. And Paul, I'm sorry, I'm looking at personal spending. I mean, I think the consumer, I look carefully, some very nice work out on Twitter and LinkedIn of the breakup of the new 1.3% GDP number, and it's somewhat a consumer ascendant, and I'm not sure I buy it. Personal spending interests me.
Exactly, Tom. So at 8:30 this morning, Wall Street time, we'll get personal spending. Consensus is for an increase of 0.3%. Personal income also expected to be up at 0.3%. So people are spending what they're earning.
I'm pleased to announce there's been a Gura sighting.
Oh, boy.
Left the St. Regis, went out, turned right. He's going back over to his stand. I don't know. Is he in front of Prada or Gucci? I don't know.
Yeah, well,
We should, for those of you that don't know this, we should pay to see Mr. Trump, of course, in the Trump Tower on Fifth Avenue.
Fifth Avenue. Yep.
It's pretty fancy.
It is fancy over there. Yeah.
I mean, Lisa's over there on a weekly basis.
Of course. Yep.
No, twice a week even.
Yep. Shops.
Stay with us. Worldwide, this is Bloomberg Surveillance.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
And this Bloomberg Business Flash brought to you by BNY Mellon's Insight. 3 days of countless opportunities to expand your knowledge and put your practice at the forefront of the wealth management industry. June 4th through 6th in Nashville. Visit insight.bnymellon.com. All right, futures falling as traders look to the Fed's preferred inflation gauge, yes, the PCE deflator, for clues on timing of interest rate cuts. Now, experts are saying it could bring some cheer to the markets, as it's forecast to have moderated in April to the slowest monthly pace this year. Personal spending income also probably cooled, but Bloomberg Economics says that alone won't make the case for rate cuts. We shall see. We have NASDAQ futures down 0.3% or 69 points, S&P futures down 0.2% or 10 points, and Dow futures little change, down 32 points. Over to the bond market, we have the 2-year yield 4.94%, up 1 basis point. The 10-year yield 4.55%, and that is little change. Commodities, we have spot gold higher at $2,344 an ounce. Brent crude $81 a barrel. WTI crude $78 a barrel. To earnings we go. Shares of Gap soaring this morning, up 25%. Reported better than expected results, raised its outlook for the full year. But Nordstrom, their shares lower, down 7%. Revenue topped estimates, but the company reported a wider than expected first quarter loss, and that's why you're seeing shares lower. And Costco, up 1%. It reported fiscal third quarter profit, revenue, same-store sales beat forecasts. The most important news, well, according to me, the announcement from its new CFO that the price of the $1.50 hot dog combo will not change. It's been that way for nearly 4 decades. Did you know that? That is your Bloomberg Business Flash, Tom and Paul.
We're going to cover this with Lisa Mateo this morning. I mean, it's really iconic. Is that what's called a loss leader? Like when the Mateo clan goes in, do you chow down?
My mother loves it. She goes there specifically for the hot dog combo.
And the food court is right at the front door.
Right at the front door. I mean, it's always packed, I got to tell you.
Is it?
Yeah.
But it's a ginormous hot dog. And you get a soda for $1.50.
Wow.
I mean, where can you do that?
No, you're right.
Nowhere.
Before you go spend $785
Correct.
on 2 years of
At least
tuna
you get
fish.
some kind of bargain.
Thank you. Lisa Mateo with a report. We thank Oliver Chen over at TD Cowen also for perspective on Costco. Excuse me, this morning. This is a joy. As Paul Sweeney mentioned, we got Bob Michael coming up in the 8 o'clock hour. And to be strong here in the 7 o'clock hour around all the political news, to have Peter Hooper with us, just simply head of all of economic research at Deutsche Bank. There's no other way to put it. They gave him a title of vice chair. Keep him happy. But we're thrilled that Dr. Hooper could join us this morning. Peter Hooper, I've never asked you this question, but it works today. At the bottom of your research note, you, Peter Hooper, say, but what if the election turns messy? Did the election turn messy last night?
Tom, it certainly raised some uncertainty. I mean, I think the speed and the strength of that decision by the jury did catch some people by surprise, and not surprised to see a little bit of a reaction in the markets today. Certainly, there were those who felt that Donald Trump was going to be good for the markets if he is elected, given the likelihood we'd see a lighter hand on regulation, maybe a little stronger push to cut taxes. But there are other elements in the picture as well.
Does it change the September 18th meeting? I mean, I believe the last meeting before the election, but is the Fed affected by Peter Hooper's messy link of economics and politics?
Not at all. We don't see the Fed moving on rates, cutting rates until late in the year. We felt all along that the inflation picture is just a little too close, and it would be uncomfortable to start a rate cut just ahead of in the meeting before the election. So our view is that we won't see rate cuts until later in the year. Of course, it is going to be inflation driven. We have another 4 months of inflation data before the September meeting, and if the numbers come in more like they did in the second half last year, at 2% or less for many of those months, annual rate, we could well see that. I mean, our view might have to change, but at this point, the inflation numbers looking to be steady enough to stay keep the Fed on in the background until later in the year.
So, Peter, is that a way of saying that this Federal Reserve maybe has engineered, in fact, what people would call a soft landing?
It's remarkable for a bank that was the first on the street to call for a recession over 2 years ago. We've had quite a turn here. Yes, I think the Fed is now on track for a soft landing. It's remarkable they've been able to pull off the unprecedented. We've never seen a central bank disinflate this much without inducing a recession. But they've had some good news on the supply side, not just the unwinding of supply chain developments, but also a sizable increase in labor force, helping them along the way here. But I think the most important factor that has enabled the Fed to do this is the aggressiveness with which they turned and raised rates in 2022, convincing people that they were on the case.
So, Peter, I mean, this Federal Reserve, I guess if nothing else, they're very consistent on their message about getting to 2% inflation. I guess my question to you is, what's so special about 2%? Why not 2.5%? Why not 3%? Why not 1.5%? I mean, how do you think about the natural rate of inflation in this economy?
Well, it's certainly this final mile of getting inflation from 3% down to 2% is potentially going to be a bit more painful. And if we do go into a recession, it'll be because the Fed has tried so hard. So people, it's a good question to ask. Why go through that pain to get down to 2%? I think that the main reason is that some time ago the Fed decided 2% was a good place to be, and they've invested a lot of time and energy in anchoring expectations at that level. So if they were to move the goalpost midstream here, just because it was tough to get there, that would hit Fed credibility. That would make it much more difficult to achieve the kind of soft landing that Jay Powell looks like he's going to be able to do so.
Quickly here, Dr. Hooper, when you triangulate with David Folkerts-Landau and Matt Luzetti, can Deutsche Bank state that we're still under the spell of multiple stimuli that we saw in the pandemic, or are we beyond the many stimuluses?
So I mean, there are still some significant stimuli in the pipeline. We think that the savings, the household savings that was amassed has not been fully run down. That is still providing some lift to consumer spending. We also see business investment certainly picking up and being supported by the CHIPS Act, the Inflation Reduction Act. That's going to go on for a while to come here. So yes, there is still some fiscal stimulus in the pipeline.
Peter Hooper, thank you so much. A valuable brief this morning before important economic data at 8:30. Dr. Hooper, of course, out of Michigan and Princeton. He is definitive at Deutsche Bank. Paul, what do you see on the screen here? I mean, it's like a Friday. We're waiting for 8:30.
I think we are, Tom. I think that's exactly right here. We got a little bit of red on the screen here. The S&P off about 0.2%. The NASDAQ off about 0.4%. On the yield front, Tom, yield's just, I don't know, we'll call it 4.55% on your 10-year Treasury. But I'll give you the Bitcoin quote here. Off just slightly. Off about 0.1%, 68,300 on your Bitcoin investment there,
Can you buy an Ethereum?
You're almost able to buy an ETF with Ethereum.
Not yet, though.
Not yet.
Maybe Monday.
Yeah, we'll see.
I'm kidding.
But that's how the kids play it.
We will see. In moments, we're going to go down to the Trump Tower on Fifth Avenue. Mr. Gurr is ensconced there. He'll be with us a couple times this morning. Many good guests coming up. I really want to highlight, not get goosebumps, but Nick Akerman will join us in the 9 o'clock hour. He is legit. He is a Watergate prosecutor with immense perspective on economics, finance, investment, on an historic moment for the nation, Bloomberg's surveillance.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo. Will today's inflation data revive hopes for policy easing? Well, we're going to find out if there's signs inflation returning to target when the PC deflator is released, 8:30 Wall Street time. Ahead of it, we have NASDAQ futures down 0.3% or 69 points. Dow futures down 0.1%, 37 points. S&P futures down 0.2% or 10 points. The 2-year yield 4.94%, up 1 basis point. The 10-year yield 4.55%. And that is little change. What's moving the markets? That would be Dell. Shares really under pressure this morning, down 16% after its AI server sales. Well, they failed to impress investors. Now, in other news, sources saying Hertz working with advisors on options to raise financing. Those shares up about 0.2%. And shares of Paramount Global up 0.5%. Film and TV producer David Ellison sweetened his bid for the company. Sources saying he's lowering the amount he's willing to pay controlling investor Shari Redstone and directing more money to the company's non-voting shareholders. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom and Paul.
Lisa Mateo, thank you so much. Of course, we've got two huge stories today. The economic data, the market reaction into the end of the month, and of course, history made last evening for the United States of America. Steve Chivarone will be with us. It will be a little bit shorter with Mr. Chivarone today because right now we must go 4 blocks away, down Fifth Avenue, past the Apple Store.
Yeah.
He's next to Prada, across from Gucci and the Trump Tower. It is a rarefied fancy-dom of Fifth Avenue, New York City. David Gura joins us, truly encyclopedic on this moment. He is, of course, the host of The Big Take on Bloomberg. David Gura, what would you presume the president will say at 11 a.m. this morning?
Well, that's when he's expected to give a press conference in the building behind me, Tom, and I am amazed at your knowledge of geography here, the commercial geography on Fifth Avenue. But I think that what we're going to hear from the former president is a reiteration of what we heard day after day after day during the trial. He customarily came down during breaks in those proceedings and at the end of the day to talk to reporters and supporters in the lobby of that building. Being in the atrium at Trump Tower, a building that he built and worked out of for so long, is a better backdrop, to be frank, for the message that he's been trying to convey to the American people, that what we've seen over these last few weeks, Tom, has been a distraction and nothing else. He feels wrongly persecuted. He's taken issue with the judge and the proceedings themselves. So I expect a familiar refrain from the former president delivered in a space that is more comfortable and, to be candid, more photogenic for him as he tries to move what's been taking place in the legal arena, Tom, into the political one more fully.
David Gura, overnight, amid all of the punditry, there was a spectacular article. I'm going to give credit to the New York Times. I could be off on that, of a prosecutor from Chicago who basically said the fact is the former president did not listen to his defense. That was the opinion of this prosecutor. Is he seeking advice or taking advice as he goes to this 11 a.m. press conference?
He's not been someone who has been fond of seeking or taking advice, certainly not unsolicited advice. And so we've seen him throughout all these proceedings with his attorney, Todd Blanche, and others, them taking the lead on this, but at the same while going down to disparage the judge in the proceedings, as I said. I'm uncertain what guidance he's been given ahead of this press conference, of course, Tom, but we now move into this stage where he's looking at July 11th. That's the date on which he's going to be sentenced by Judge Juan Merchan, who oversaw that trial, just a few days away from the Republican National Convention as well. So he's focusing on the sentencing. He's focusing on the appeals as well. Often it's the case that other lawyers will pick up that process from those who were the defense in the criminal trial. We'll see what happens there. But again, as he tries to move and face the general election, there is still this tug from the legal process he's going to have to contend with. And we're going to see that play out in the coming weeks as we see filings, again, related to the sentencing, Tom, and related to the appeal as well.
David, from the campaign's perspective, the Trump campaign perspective, do we expect the former president to be hitting the road now that this trial is over and kind of go into full campaign mode? Is that the plan?
That's what he's professed to want to do. Like during those breaks, he often came out and said he'd rather be on the campaign trail. It's unclear what that means. And if we could see something that would look a lot like what we saw in 2016 with him giving rallies and traversing the country. To be frank, we haven't seen a whole lot of that yet. And of course, over these last few weeks, he's been confined to Manhattan because he's had to be present for all of the trial proceedings themselves. But again, Donald Trump has expressed eagerness to get back to the work of campaigning. And certainly that date in late June is going to be significant when he faces Joe Biden in Atlanta at the CNN studios for that first of two presidential debates. So we are going to see elements of a traditional campaign here. I just couldn't say at this point how much of a sort of traditional or regular campaign we're going to see with the kind of travel that we saw back in 2016, Paul.
Outside of Trump Tower are David Gura, and he will continue with us through the morning as we move to 11 a.m. And, of course, Bloomberg Radio worldwide on YouTube, on Android, will give you the comments of the former president this morning. We are moving back and forth between two stories, the economics, finance, and investment of the nation, and, of course, this political moment. Joining us now on the former Steve Chivarone, Senior Portfolio Manager, Federated Hermes, here on what we see at 8:30. Is the basic belief at your shop, Steve, that we are still in a disinflationary trend?
I think it's sticky, Tom. We think we'll get a core PCE reading today somewhere around 2.7 or 2.8. That's the good news. Bad news is that's probably going to be the lowest year-over-year core PCE reading of the year. As you get to the back half, the year-over-year comps become pretty tough. And so unless inflation is going to slow on a monthly basis to exactly 2%, starting right now and staying there between now and the end of the year, you're likely to see that year-over-year number drift higher and probably be at or above 3% when we get to year end. So it's fine. It's not reaccelerating at this point. It's not problematic, but it's sticky. We don't think this is an easy glide path to 2%.
Steve, I know you spend a lot of time at Federated Hermes thinking about asset allocation. I don't really need to talk to you because I'm just going to sit in 2-year treasuries and get near 5%. How do you guys at Federated think about asset allocation with those kinds of rates out there?
Well, I do think you're looking at the right part of the yield curve. So you've got folks that have built up huge cash piles, and I think cash yields, which certainly Federated Hermes is well versed in cash, but they've probably peaked. And we think we will get perhaps one rate cut at the end of this year. We think that'll be perceived by the market as the beginning of a cut cycle. And so you really do need to start moving out of cash because those yields are going to decline over time against a 3% inflation rate. The real yield there is not terrific. It's fine. It deserves a neutral place in the portfolio, but you need to start moving out. And so if you're someone who's a little bit more worried about inflation, we think you do want to be out on that 1-2 year part of the curve with the bulk of the money you move out of cash, but also move some to the intermediate part of the curve because there are some signs of a slowing consumer. There are some risk factors out there. And if the economy slows more than expected, that's not our base case. But if it does, you're going to want to have some longer duration fixed income in the portfolio.
This is really important with the heritage of Federated and Steve Authing. We bust the chops, Steve, of you people, but you've been doing this for decades. Do you go narrow in a more tendency towards less diversification, trying to pick the winners, or do you really sense a broadening market out 3 years?
No, this broadens in our view. It broadens in our view. So remember, our base case view, Tom, is that you've got an economy that's going to be stable around 2.5% growth, and you've got enough disinflation that the Fed will start to very slowly and in a very shallow way cut rates. The parts of the equity market right now that are most levered to that, right, the cyclicals that'll be levered to that better than expected growth, and the interest rate sensitive names, the dividend payers, small caps, which represent the nexus of both of those things, that's the cheapest part of the market. And so we look at that as a wonderful opportunity. On top of it, you've got an earnings handoff. As you get to the end of the year, the earnings growth of the forgotten 493 is going to eclipse, by most estimates, the earnings growth of the Mag 7. We want to be there for that. We want to be there for that. So we look at the underperformance of everything outside the Mag 7 this year as a buying opportunity that's going to pay off later into this year and into 2025. And we think it's a stock picker's, I don't want to say paradise, that might be a little bit too strong, but it's a stock picker's paradise.
It's a stock picker's paradise, but do these stock pickers, do they need a Fed to start cutting rates now?
They don't need the Fed to start cutting rates now, but they're going to need rate cuts. I think you've got a large contingent of clients that when their advisor is saying, hey, let's move out, are saying, no, I'm getting 5.25% in cash. I don't even want to talk to you. But once that first rate cut comes and that 5.25 becomes, 5, and then folks like me are on, shows like this saying, hey, this could be the beginning of a Fed funds rate going to 4% or 3%. Those same clients are going to call up their advisors and say, why didn't you lock me in at 5% on the 2-year or 4.75 on the 10-year? Or tell me about, how I want to diversify and get into the stock market in a bigger way here because my safe yield is declining. And so you need that cut to unlock it. We think it's coming.
So, Steve, just real quickly, 30 seconds here. What's your kind of number one equity sector that you're looking at these days?
I think from a sector perspective, and this is a phrase I never thought I'd say, I don't know how you're not excited about utilities. It's the second highest earnings growth in the S&P.
What sector? What do they call it?
Utilities. Tom.
It's an AI play.
Utilities.
Steve, a stud like you, a young stud like you, never in their life has looked at you wouldn't know Dominion if it hit you over the head.
Don't be surprised, Tom. Don't let the boyish good looks fool you. No, look, you've got a scenario where you've got the second highest earnings growth in the S&P. It's interest rate sensitive ahead of a rate hike cycle, and you have a secular AI story.
Yep,
and so when you look at the sectors, it's unique, it's special, but it's interesting.
Yeah, you're unique and special too. Go away. Michael Barr is more important with you. Steve Chiavarone, thank you so much. On utilities from Federated Hermes with our news in New York City. Michael Barr.
Thank you very much, Tom, Paul, Lisa. And for the first time in American history, a former president and a major party candidate in the next presidential election is a convicted felon. Reaction is still coming in following Donald Trump's conviction on 34 counts of falsifying business records. Bloomberg News legal reporter Eric Larson was in the Manhattan courthouse as the verdicts came down.
Trump had a very solemn, you could say potentially angry look on his face, more so than during most of the trial, and walked out of the courtroom without glancing at any members of the press, as he had done many times throughout the trial. He just had a stoic look on his face and walked out.
Bloomberg's Eric Larson. Now comes sentencing, which is scheduled for July 11th, or just 4 days before the Republican National Convention. Trump is expected to appeal. The former president is expected to address the media this morning at 11 a.m. outside of Trump Tower, and Bloomberg will carry his comments live. A Minneapolis police officer was killed when he responded to a shooting call and was providing medical attention to a man who shot him in what authorities are calling an ambush. The suspected gunman and another person were also killed in the shooting. At a gathering in Prague, NATO's Secretary General discussed Ukraine striking targets inside Russia. It could mean an escalation and an increased possibility of expanding the conflict. Alliance Chief Jens Stoltenberg.
Ukraine has the right for self-defense, and that includes also the right to strike legitimate military targets inside Russia.
Moscow warns it would certainly retaliate at any NATO trainers on Ukrainian soil. Helping to facilitate such strikes would be, in Russia's view, fair game. And the Biden administration has made a major reversal, saying Ukraine is now permitted to fire U.S. weapons into Russia as they battle to maintain Kharkiv. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Michael Barr. This is Bloomberg. Tom, Paul, Lisa.
Michael Barr, thanks so much. Greatly appreciate it. This morning, we're going between these two major stories, that of key economic data here at 8:30, but also politics. We have an esteemed professor coming up. I'm really just honored to have the professor from Bowdoin with us here in moments. Paul, I'm speaking truly uninformed. I just simply am not up to speed on this. But, with all my vast knowledge of Perry Mason, and I've seen the Henry Fonda movie twice, the speed of the verdict, I was stunned. I mean, I stood there last night with my phone in my hand, just absolutely stunned.
Exactly. I mean, I was about to walk up to the beach, and then he said there's going to be a verdict, so I didn't even get to go. Yeah. So there you go. And I watch every single episode of Law & Order.
Stay with us on this important story. From New York City, Bloomberg surveillance.
markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
And this Bloomberg Business Flash brought to you by IBKR. Financial advisors switch to Interactive Brokers for lowest cost global trading and turnkey custody solutions. No ticket charges and no conflicts of your interest at ibkr.com/RIA. Futures pointing to a lower open this morning. We have NASDAQ futures down 0.3% or 57 points. Dow futures down 0.1% as well as S&P futures. The 2-year yield 4.94%. That's up a basis point. The 10-year yield at 4.55%. And that is little change. Today, all eyes on the core PCE deflator that comes out in less than an hour from now. And then in other news, we have TikTok saying that the Reuters story that the company was preparing a U.S. copy of its core algorithm, well, is, quote, misleading and factually inaccurate. And Frito-Lay, the snack company owned by PepsiCo, it's going to let go of 88 workers, or about a third of its workforce. That's from a manufacturing plant in Middletown, New York. PepsiCo up 0.2%. And sources say Apple planning to overhaul its Siri virtual assistant with more advanced AI. It's going to let users control app functions with their voice. Shares of Apple down about 0.1%. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom and Paul.
Thank you so much, Lisa. Last night, when we saw the news, Paul and I described with our wonderful staff an effort not to do punditry, but actually to talk to people with a historical perspective of the nation and of this moment that we see as former President Trump speaks here in 3 hours to the nation in some form. Our David Gura is outside Trump Tower this morning. And this for me is a great honor with the great relationship I had with James McGregor Burns of Williams College over the years, and of course from Arthur Schlesinger and his iconic The Imperial Presidency to move on through James McGregor Burns to someone who owns the high ground right now is Andy Runalevich. He is at Bowdoin University and has tried to carry the torch forward of our study of our presidency. Andy, just your initial insight today to this historic moment, just an open question, nothing specific. How would you teach this moment at Bowdoin in class?
Yeah, well, thank you for having me, and thanks for the flattering comparison to Professors Burns and Schlesinger, actually. It's exalted company. I think it is important to put this into context. We haven't, of course, had in the past any president be convicted of criminal charges. We've come close, of course, with Richard Nixon, and had he not been pardoned, he almost certainly would have been convicted of a wide range of crimes while in office. If we go back further, we have John Tyler, right, the pre-Civil War president who actually then joined the Confederacy during the Civil War. And he probably would have been convicted of treason later on in the 1800s had he not died first. So, here and there, we've certainly had presidents go off the rails, but we haven't had this kind of case. And I do think the emphasis on two things, on the idea that no person is above the law, and the idea that you, even as president or former president, can be tried by a jury of your peers, and those peers are ordinary people, it should matter a lot to how we think about the United States. So I think that's where I would start, is to think about the notion of equal justice under the law.
Richard Nixon took counsel from Howard Baker of Tennessee, from Barbara Conable of Western New York. Do you observe that former President Trump is taking counsel from people? How alone is he at this moment?
A little bit of the freeze going on with
what a shock. It's Bowdoin, it's Maine, and it's the end of May, so there probably is a frost this morning. There was a frost this morning.
They're going to get their 15 minutes of spring.
We'll try to get Professor Runalevich back here right now. Bob, let me know when we get the good professor back here this morning. That street in Bowdoin, is it gorgeous or what? Have you ever driven up there?
I've not been to Bowdoin, but I have so many friends that went there.
It's not Pepperdine.
No, but it's the Pepperdine of Maine. Yeah, if you like,
I think when you get into Bowdoin, he's back. We have a professor back. Professor, are you there, please, on Bloomberg Surveillance?
I am. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. We froze, which is typical at Bowdoin, where there's winter and 4th of July. There was Barbara B. Conable and Howard Baker for Dick Nixon. Who is President Trump listening to, or how lonely is he, rather, this morning at 11 a.m.?
Well, he's certainly has generated a wide range of response on social media and elsewhere from fellow Republicans, right? There's a lot of, endorsement of his claim that he's been sort of railroaded here. This is all political, nothing to do with criminality. You don't get the sense that he has the same kind of close contacts that even someone like Richard Nixon had, on Capitol Hill. I do think, he has been, inspiring various members of the Republican Party to come down to New York and to support him publicly. And of course, he's been auditioning folks for a possible vice presidential slot. So I think he's having conversations. Whether he has confidants, I'm not quite so sure. You don't hear a lot about sort of close friends of the former president. Right. And I wonder if that's a resource he could use now.
Andy, this is a presidential election year. If we didn't already have enough news out there, how do you think this conviction will play with the electorate on either side, I guess?
Yeah, well, as we know, I mean, this is not an election that comes as a shock to anyone in the sense we don't know who the candidates are. We've known for a long time this is going to be a rematch, maybe the least popular sequel since Exorcist movie came out last, right? But it is it's already baked in a lot of ways. And certainly, the former president's supporters are not going to be shifted much by this. Those who dislike the former president are not going to be shifted much. So enough is baked in that we're really talking about the margins. But on the other hand, this is a really close election. So the margins matter. I think it's hard to know how this will play into the overall pool, especially when we think about the other criminal cases that are still moving forward. But, the evidence that we saw from the Republican primaries certainly was that, people are not excited necessarily, those who were undecided about voting for someone who had been convicted of a felony. So I don't think it helps the former president.
Andy, this is an important point, and I've said this all, when I'm talking to people, and that it's normal that America is so polarized. If you go back to alien sedition and bring it on forward, haven't we always been this polarized?
Well, I mean, I don't know about this polarized, but yeah, we had a civil war. That was pretty polarized. And if you look at the period right before or right after, right, the Reconstruction period, you have similar levels of dissension between the parties. So I think it is true that a lot of us grew up sort of in an era when we sort of thought of the normal as this consensus in the middle, right? Sort of a governing consensus between, conservative Democrats and liberal Republicans and everybody on the ends. But that is not that normal in American history.
Andy, on short notice, thank you so much. Honored to have you on today. From Bowdoin, his book, The Imperial Presidency, was definitive years ago. Andy Rudalevich with us this morning as well. Paul, I mean, this is the kind of perspective I want this morning. I understand we're all completely focused on this. I think Michael Barr's coverage has been absolutely great. Yep. But I just want to know where it fits in. I don't mean, history lessons like John Tyler, but just, where does the moment fit in, frankly, as we go to 11 a.m.?
Yeah, exactly right. We'll hear from the former President Trump at 11 a.m. from Trump Tower, David Gurr across the street. I guess my personal observation thinking about the last, 8 years has been, maybe these divisions have always been there. And as Professor Rudalevich just mentioned, we did have a civil war. Maybe they've been there all along. And it just took a person like Donald Trump to allow some folks to kind of voice those differences.
The dinner parties my parents had during Vietnam, we'd sit at the top of the stairs, just like that scene in Mad Men, and listen. And everybody argued like crazy, particularly after the third Jack Daniels. Right. But they got along. And having a dinner party now displaying the polarity of the nation is virtually unthinkable.
Yeah, I think so. And I think back to
other than Lisa Mateo's house.
Exactly.
It's like that every weekend.
Exactly. I think back to my parents' house and their, parties and things. And what they had is they had a shared common bond, which was being raised into depression, fighting a world war. And I think that common bond kind of was the binding amongst all of them. Maybe we don't have that to the same extent.
We'll continue with our coverage, and of course with the leadership from Washington, Zach Cohen, and a congressional view, as well as the White House coverage. I know Anne Marie Horton working on it through the morning as well. David Gurr is outside Trump Tower. We'll have continuing coverage from him. Please stay with us. Key economic data at 8:30. Bloomberg Surveillance.
This is Bloomberg Surveillance with Tom Keene and Paul Sweeney.
Are these stocks under-owned by institutional Wall Street?
A lot of these companies talking about generative AI.
With Lisa Mateo on markets.
Investors just worried about that ongoing sales slump in China.
And Michael Barr with news.
A ship traveling through the southern Red Sea has been attacked.
The best in economics, finance, investment, and international relations. This is Bloomberg Surveillance on Bloomberg Radio.
Good morning, everyone. Paul Sweeney, Tom Keene on this historic day. The former president will speak at 11 a.m. We'll go to David Gurr in a moment outside the Trump Tower. We say good morning, and Bloomberg Surveillance brought to you by Build America Mutual insures U.S. municipal bonds that finance essential American infrastructure and provide guaranteed income to improve any portfolio. Be part of Building America. Invest in BAM, B-A-M, invest in BAM insured bonds. And we thank Build America for their support. We're on Apple CarPlay, on Android, on YouTube, a lively live chat this morning, and thank you for the real attention. And Paul, part of the attention goes to the 8:30 data.
8:30 data, PCE deflator data, Tom. And again, the Federal Reserve looking for a little bit of guidance on that inflation story. Are we there yet? Are we getting to where they want to go with inflation?
Please stay with us through the hour. Margie Patel, Francis Donald with us for this entire half hour. Bob Michael will be with us with J.P. Morgan. But first, your Bloomberg Business Flash, Lisa Mateo.
You got it. And futures still lower after U.S. equities edge lower in Thursday trading. A big part of that driven by the tech sector losses. Speaking of which, Dell shares falling before the bell, down 15%. Its first revenue increase since 2022, well, just wasn't enough to impress investors. We have S&P futures down 0.1%, or 5 points. We have Dow futures, that's little changed, and that is down about 17 points. The 2-year yield, 4.94%. That's up 1 basis point. The 10-year yield at 4.55%, and that is little changed. And we're just a half hour away from the PCE deflator, which likely moderated in April to the slowest monthly pace yet this year. We shall see. The clock is ticking. In other news, we have UBS Group completed its merger with former rival Credit Suisse. UBS ADRs, they're up about 0.5%. Over to HSBC, where sources say the firm plans to pick outgoing CEO Noel Quinn's successor by July. HSBC ADRs up 0.2%. And some IPO news. The Wall Street Journal reporting Bill Ackman planning to take his investment firm Pershing Square public as soon as next year. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom and Paul.
Lisa Mateo, thank you so much. The host of The Big Take, David Gurr, with all of his political experience outside Trump Tower this morning. David, can you visualize the 11 a.m. statement by the former president? You know, for those that don't know, a bustling Fifth Avenue surrounded by fancy stores, 1 block down from the Apple Store. Is he going to be in that enclosed area of Trump Tower outside near the sidewalk making comments?
Our understanding is he's going to be in the atrium, so right inside, as you say, the building is bookended by a Gucci store and a Tiffany store, Armani across the street. We saw news conferences here, of course, during the campaign in 2016. We saw him speak here after the events in Charlottesville when he was the president of the United States. So I expect something similar, the president coming down into that atrium, into that space.
Right.
Reporters will be allowed in shortly. Right now, the typical police presence, barricades up everywhere, and people kind of...
David, not that I've been over there often, but I would suggest it's a tourist attraction in that people, that support the president, they want their picture taken by that historic clock outside Trump Tower. Will he get a President Trump turnout this morning?
We've seen a few people wander by. I've heard a couple of folks say that they support President Trump. There hasn't been a huge crowd of his supporters here, easily identifiable. A lot of people kind of coming by to see what the scene is like, people running by with their dogs, et cetera. But I think it will mirror what we saw in that park across from the courthouse downtown yesterday and the day before, and for the duration of the trial. There were some very ardent supporters of the former president who were there. I'm gonna bet that some of them make their way up here to this side of Manhattan.
David, when I walk to Penn Station this afternoon, I think I will avoid that whole Fifth Avenue area. What's the expectation for? Is there going to be any in the audience? Will there be anybody from Washington? Do you believe? Like we saw some of his supporters from Washington, whether members of Congress and former cabinet folks, kind of coming to the trial. Do we expect to see something like that today?
We'll see what surrogates show up. Doug Burgum was in town speaking outside the courthouse yesterday. from North Dakota. So there are surrogates for the Trump campaign who have been in town. We'll see how many of them show up as well. But
right.
I've been paying very close attention to the statements and tweets from those surrogates overnight and just from heads of the Republican Party. And we've seen this effort to kind of double down and really double down on that embrace of the former president and his campaign.
What will be the big take of 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue? David Gura, how would you presume President Biden and his surrogates will respond in the, say, over the weekend and into the Sunday talk shows, including Face the Nation with Margaret Brennan?
Grasp the historic significance of this, as we all do. We've never had a former president, of course, convicted of felony crimes before. But I see them tiptoeing very carefully around all of this. I think that they see it as an important moment, perhaps a good thing for the campaign, but I think that the White House is acutely aware that it's something that a lot of Americans don't care about and indeed want to dismiss.
Yeah.
And this is a moment to, yes, acknowledge it, but also focus on policy issues and to focus on fundraising as well. David
Gura to continue with us through the morning as we move to 11 a.m. and comments by the former president. I really want to thank you out on the live chat on YouTube. Yeah, we're getting a cross-section of opinion. Some people saying, why are we doing politics on Bloomberg? But this historic moment speaks to the linkages, Paul Sweeney, that we see from politics over to the belly of the curve. Right? I mean, there's nobody better to talk about the political dynamics of the belly of the curve than our next guest.
Bob Michael joins us. He's the CIO and head of global fixed income, currency, and commodities group at J.P. Morgan Asset Management, Tom. But Bob began his career at Deutsche Bankers Trust. Now, when I started on Wall Street, really the smartest people were Bankers Trust. I mean, math, smart derivatives,
we
futures.
had the academic on from Bowdoin, and he took us back to John Tyler before the Civil War. That's when Bob Michael started at Bankers Trust.
But Bob Michael, I mean, again, I think math, smart people at Bankers Trust. Bob got his undergraduate degree in the classics from the University of Pennsylvania. So I don't know how that all happened, but no matter what, he ended up at J.P. Morgan doing some stuff there. Bob, thanks for joining us here in our studio. We're going to get some inflation data today, Bob, around 8:30 Wall Street time. How do you think the Fed's going to look at this inflation data? What are they really looking for in terms of some guidance about what to do with the June meeting, and maybe more important, the September meeting?
I think the Fed is hoping, like me, that the inflation data is a non-event. Summer officially started past Memorial Day. Let's just try to get through the summer and into September and see where we are on not only inflation, but also the labor market and growth in general. I think they'd be happy with a 0.3. You know, hopefully it has a 0.2 handle on it, 0.28 now that we all go to two decimals. You know, everyone seems to do that. A 0.34 might worry them. But I think it's largely going to be a non-event. It should print around 0.3. Most of the data is already in on the composition of it.
Describe what you learn and your team learns now from the inflation-adjusted yield, the residual, the real yield. What I see is clearly a trend to a higher real yield, but is it collared at that spike that we saw at the end of 2023? Have we reached a resistance on the real yield where we're not going higher, or can you frame out a more, not damaging, but just the reality of a higher inflation-adjusted yield?
I think it's cycle dependent, and I think for the cycle that we're in now, we've seen the high in real yield because there are enough participants in the market, and certainly enough of our client base, that is stepping back, looking at the real yield in the bond market and say, you know what, you're right, I haven't seen that since 2007. The Fed is telling us, particularly Chair Powell, that they're coming in to cut rates. I don't want to really miss where yields are now in the bond market. I'm going to start putting money to work. I think that's it for now. I don't think we're going back to real yields as a structural norm of where we were over the last 15 years. I think we're going back to a world that existed pre-financial crisis, but we don't get there all in a couple of years. It will take some time.
How much credit risk are you guys thinking about these days, or are you just sticking tight to the Treasury market?
Love the public credit markets.
That's what I like to hear.
Absolutely love them.
Boom.
And believe me, our credit teams who live in this space are fretting about how tight credit spreads have gotten. I point out they were tighter from 2004 to 2006. They were tighter in 95 to 98. They can go tighter. There's that whole private credit market out there where the marginal borrower is funding itself. It's effectively reinsuring the public credit markets. It's hard to find any pockets of stress. In the investment grade space, you're picking up yields of 80 to 90 basis points over treasuries. It's almost free money.
Well, this is like, let's listen to Bob Michael from a previous visit in Latin. Greek.
Arma virumque cano Troiae qui primus aboris.
No, I'm going to go further than that. I mean, that has something to do with the Yankees lineup. But I'm going to just say, honorant navum, which is load the boat.
Load the boat.
I mean, is that what you're saying here? Is load the?
I'm impressed.
Yeah,
and by
it
the
was
way,
AI, Google Translate.
By the way, studying Latin, where you can read a paragraph of sentences and all the verbs come at the end, are great training for the markets because it's disciplined thinking. And it's a puzzle you have to solve.
I could so rip up the script now on the value of foreign language
I
and
know.
statistics, but this is too important a day here. But the emotion of loading the boat, your colleague Ian Lingen in crime at BMO Capital Markets is the same thing. Your observation here is stop overthinking just by coupon, right? Am I distilling that down?
Yeah, that's right. And by the way, I've traveled a lot over the last couple of months, and I've seen a lot of different client bases. I've seen institutional clients, both domestic pension funds and insurance companies, foreign official institutions. I've seen wealth management platforms. The one common denominator is show me something where the all-in yield is above cash. And I'm getting 5.5 on cash. You have to go to credit.
We're going to come back with Bob Michael in an extended half hour. Let's go right to it with futures at -4. Pronuntium novum aberratum, Michael Barr.
Former President Donald Trump plans to give a news conference this morning after yesterday's unprecedented verdicts in his hush money trial. Bloomberg will carry it live at 11 a.m. Trump became the first former president to be convicted of felony crimes as a New York jury found him guilty of all 34 charges in a scheme to illegally influence the 2016 election. After the verdicts, Trump criticized Manhattan District Attorney Alvin Bragg, who led the charges.
You have a sore respect, DA, and the whole thing. We didn't do a thing wrong. I'm a very innocent man.
AG Bragg spoke after the verdict.
This type of white-collar prosecution is core to what we do at the Manhattan District Attorney's Office.
And the star witness in the hush money trial, Michael Cohen, was asked by ABC's Good Morning America if he had any kind of interaction or moment with the former president during his testimony.
Only once. The rest of the time, he had his eyes closed. He was slumped back, not sure whether he was sleeping or just resting his eyes, as he would say. But there was very limited interaction.
Trump is due to be sentenced on the 11th of July. Finally, Bruhat Soma has won the Scripps National Spelling Bee. Bruhat spelled 29 words correctly in a lightning round tiebreaker to win the title last night.
Bruette.
Brouette.
Oh, boy. The 12-year-old seventh grader from Tampa, he receives a trophy, $50,000 in cash and prizes. Global news 24 hours a day, whenever you want it, with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Michael Barr, B-A-R-R, and this is Bloomberg.
I'm the worst. I mean, I used to be in tears.
Goodness
I was like,
spell check.
I was last place in the spelling.
Oh,
bee.
yeah.
I was scarred for life.
These kids are crazy good. I mean, it's just amazing every year.
It's a real facility.
It is.
Bob Michael, are you good at Trivial Pursuit?
I like Trivial Pursuit, especially old TV.
Do you, Michael? I don't know. We're going to have to come back on this. Michael Barr, thank you for that. From New York City, I can't spell surveillance. Good morning.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo. Futures falling as traders look to the Fed's preferred inflation gauge for clues on the timing of interest rate cuts. We are T-minus 15 minutes away from the PCE deflator. Now, it's forecast to have moderated in April. Personal spending and income also probably cooled, but Bloomberg Economics says that alone won't make the case for rate cuts. We shall see. Over to NASDAQ futures down 0.2% or 45 points. Dow futures little change, down 25 points. S&P futures down 0.1% or 5 points. The 2-year yield at 4.93%. That's little change. The 10-year yield at 4.55%. Over to commodities, we have spot gold higher at $2,343 an ounce. Brent crude $81 a barrel. WTI crude $77 a barrel. To earnings, we have shares of Gap soaring up 22%. Its earning beat and it also upgraded its outlook. Nordstrom, though, on the other hand, down 4%. Its revenue topped estimates, but the thing is the company reported a wider than expected first quarter loss. And Costco shares are now lower, down nearly 1%. Fiscal third quarter profit, revenue, same-store sales beat forecast, but investors were looking for a little bit more with member numbers. And not even news of keeping that $1.50 hot dog combo price could help that. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom and Paul.
Lisa Mateo, thanks so much. Of course, Costco out. And, you know, Oliver Chen wrote this up at TD Cowen.
I know.
I mean, you know, he put it in the headline.
I'm going to have to go this weekend looking at $1.50 hot dog.
There you go.
So there's Lisa Mateo.
Check it out.
Thanks so much. David Gura will join us at 9 o'clock, 2 hours away from important comments from the former president of the United States. Mr. Gura is outside Trump Tower this morning with the assembled on a perfect Friday, I should say, here in New York City. Neil Duta will join at about 8:27. And we will talk to him with his optimism on the American economic experiment. And then Francis Donald will join us and the legendary Margie Patel on the backside.
Strong.
With us here to get smarter towards Neil Duta is Bob Michael. He is with J.P. Morgan. And one of the things they do that's not talked about enough is they assist companies in issuing debt. What does big tech do here with spreads priced to perfection? They're way underdebted. What does J.P. Morgan counsel to the tech titans in their historic free cash flow?
Well, there's a lot of demand out there in the client base for high-quality borrowers, and tech certainly fits the bill. You've got domestic pension fund and insurance companies that are looking to put money out 10, 15, 20, 30 years, and they're looking for stable borrowers. And right now, tech, again, fits that bill. I think there's a chance for them to put in place some long-term capital by issuing 30-year debt at a very low all-in cost.
Totally unfair, but let's try the exercise, understanding that this is just a guesstimate by Mr. Michael with decades of experience. Off of the 10-year full faith and credit, what would a 10-year piece from Apple be above that right now? How many hundredths of a percentage point above that?
You know, I'd be shocked if Apple had to pay above 50 basis points to issue debt. My guess is lower than that. I think it would be a struggle for Apple to get an all-in funding cost of above 5%.
So
it's a great company.
It is. And so, Bob, if I'm a salesperson at Goldman Sachs or Morgan Stanley and I've got a new issuance, a new company coming with some bonds, my first call is to you guys. Is there a deal? Like, do you hang up?
Well, it should be.
And do you hang up the phone on? What are you hanging up the phone these days on?
Absolutely not. We have clients who are desperate to put money into the long end of the market.
Really?
While the total return investor, while the wealth management platforms may say, you know what, I'm cozy in cash right now. Let's see if the Fed cuts rate and if the yield curve disinverts, and I'll put money out there. When you look at insurance companies and pension funds, they have long-term liabilities.
Yep.
And as rates have risen from historic lows, even though they're down a little bit from the recent highs, their liabilities have still deflated a lot from where they were in 2021. So they're able to go in and de-risk by taking money out of cash or harvesting some profits in their other asset classes and putting it into the long end of the market. But they don't really want to do it with just treasuries. If they could pick up half 0.75% in a borrower that is high quality, they'll do that all day long, and they should.
How about, think about the last few years. It's been tough to be a fixed income investor. One of the bright spots has kind of been high yield. How do you guys think about the high yield market? Because everybody's talking about recession here, recession there, but high yield performs.
High yield looks great to us. If we think about the composition of the market, it's the highest rated high yield market, if there is such a thing, that has existed in history. Now, it's not a market that's been around forever. It really got going in the late 1980s. So
Great time, Lisa.
Yeah, take it for, a grain of salt that the history's not there. But let's think about the composition of the market. In 2020, the early days of COVID, 6% of that market washed away. It defaulted. So you've got a survivor bias of 94% of the market.
Right.
The marginal borrower that would come into this market now is actually going to the private credit market. And you've got a lot of rating upgrades going on. I think with yields at around 8% and credit spreads of over 300 basis points, there's a lot of room for this to run.
So this is really important. I think of the swashbuckling days, Felix Smith of Putnam and others in high yield, and it was like roulette almost. And it's not roulette now, as you mentioned, 6% washed out in COVID. Give us a rating for our listeners. And by the way, commercial free here through the key economic data in 7 minutes with Bob Michael of J.P. Morgan. Give us a rating that is appropriate high yield for mere mortals. It's not triple C, right?
No, I think there's plenty of borrowers. We kind of think the sweet spot is single B to double B rated. There's a large part of the universe. You're right, Tom. The swashbuckling days are over. Remember, it always used to be referred to as the junk bond market.
Yeah.
There was a shakeout. It's matured a lot. It's a legitimate source of non-bank funding. It extends credit into the system. We think there's just a lot of value there. If we look back at previous cycles, 1995, 96, 2004 to 2006, credit spreads were 250 over.
Nobody's listening right now. Good morning. The YouTube feed this morning, by the way, is really brilliant. Thank you guys for measured comments on this political event. David Gura outside Trump Tower. I'm sorry, but a guy building a skyscraper on Park Avenue's been voicing private equity and particularly private credit. Now, nobody's listening now except Mateo, but the basic idea, Bob Michael, is what are you advising to James Dimon about private credit? How does Bob Michael see private credit forward?
So
when he starts with so, that means he doesn't want to answer the question.
Yeah. I'm trying to figure out how to answer it. Look, it's become a legitimate source of non-bank lending. You have to accept that it's here permanently. Private credit, the estimate on Bloomberg is it's 1.7 trillion in size. The public high yield market is 1.6 trillion in size.
Oh.
So private credit is now larger than the public high yield market. At a time last year when we looked at senior loan officer opinion surveys and they showed substantially tighter credit conditions and we all projected that to recession, what we missed was that this vast pool of private credit was extending credit into the system. There was a credit multiplier to that, and it more than offset the tightening of lending standards that was going on at the traditional banks. It's there. It serves a purpose. You have to watch it and look at it.
Quickly, Neil Dutta's on deck here. Bob Michael, just simply here, you got a new skyscraper. J.P. Morgan has just published they're doing a 3-day work week. I mean, it's great. Are you staunching the brain drain from the big banks like J.P. Morgan over to private credit? Is that brain drain slowed down because you've gone to a 3-day work week?
We're in 5 days a week. We love being in 5 days a week. After I'm done chatting with you crowd, I'm down off to our Midtown campus. It will be great to see everyone. We have an overabundance of people looking to get into J.P. Morgan. We had something like 400,000 applications for 400 summer analyst slots.
Wow.
So there's no shortage of premium talent that wants to come to JP Morgan every single day, and I think it's the right decision for them.
Michael, thank you so much. Out of all of fixed income, JP Morgan investment here before this key economic data. 4 minutes away. We are with you commercial free here through this key data. Thank you for listening on YouTube. Search Bloomberg Podcasts. Subscribe to Bloomberg Podcasts. Now joining us, Neil Duta, Renaissance Macro, for too short a visit. Neil, do you still keep a constructive view on the American economic experiment?
Well, that's a great question, Tom. I do think the trade-offs are getting a little bit more challenging here for the Fed. My view is that inflation is likely to moderate over the next several quarters, okay? And if the Fed is skittish about recalibrating policy, given the coming slowing in inflation, then that would make me a little bit more concerned around the economic outlook. So that's kind of where I'm at. I think the trade-offs are not as obvious as they were a year ago. We look at the labor markets, Tom. If you look at average hourly earnings, I mean, people talk about stubborn or sticky prices. Well, wages are a very sticky price in their own right. And wages have been slowing quite meaningfully, over the last several months. If you look at the 3-month rate of change in average hourly earnings, it's running below 3% at an annual rate.
Paul, moments ago, Ian Ling and BMO Capital, real question is real spending.
Real spending.
That goes to that spending data.
Well, my spending is real, I can tell you that. Neil, talk to us about this 2% inflation data point that the Federal Reserve talks about as a target. How hard of a target is that? Should it be? Why can't the world live with, 2.5% inflation, 2.75%? How do you think about that?
Well, I think the Fed can live with that. I mean, they've signaled that they're willing to cut with inflation rates above that. I do think that the 2% number, that's not necessarily a right here, right now target. It's just, kind of a point in time. We want to be moving towards that, in that direction sort of thing. That we've litigated whether that's the right number or not. It is what it is. I think for the Fed, it just needs to be moving in that direction in order for them to feel comfortable with easing.
Why is this 830 PCE deflator important? Except for the Fed cares. Why is this inflation series more important than 14 others, Neil Duta?
Well, remember, Tom, and we have, in economics, you have often different ways of measuring the same kind of concept.
Right.
You have GDP and GDI, you have PCE and CPI, and the PCE number, it just it has a much wider scope, right? That's why, unlike CPI, 40% is not shelter, right? I mean, because it has a much wider scope. But also, it looks at things covering payments made on behalf of individuals. Right. I mean, CPI only looks at out-of-pocket expenses. So I think one way of thinking about it is CPI kind of reflects what people think they spend their money on, and the PCE data reflects what people actually spend their money on. Brilliant. And I think that's one of the reasons why the Fed is looking at PCE.
Let us move forward. Neil Duta will continue with us here as we go to this key economic data in 45 seconds. We welcome all of you on Apple CarPlay, Android Play as well. And of course on YouTube, search for Bloomberg Podcast, subscribe there. Thank you for the huge discussion, smart discussion today on the live chat on YouTube. Can't say enough about we are commercial free for the next half hour to you to digest this important data. To have Margie Patel and Francis Donald with us is wonderful. And Neil Duta will stay with us as he digests the data off his Bloomberg professional service. Of course. He does that as well. I've said this for days, I'm looking at personal spending in this new line on ECO Go of real personal spending. But PCE deflator, Paul, you tell me, is front and center.
Yeah, exactly right. I'm seeing personal income, personal spending, both expected to increase by about 0.3%, and here we come with some of that data.
Personal spending comes in a little light off the survey of the first numbers coming across. Prior 0.8, we'll look for the revision there, but comes in at a much more tepid 0.2, and that, of course, off of domestic final sales and the 1.3% GDP adjust we saw for first quarter yesterday. We're still awaiting the inflation numbers Right now, the market is as well. Red and green in the spring. Real personal spending is a negative statistic. We'll talk to Neil Duta about that. And other than that, we come in remarkably on plan where the survey gets it right. The market lifts. Futures up 4. The VIX comes in sprightly, 13.94, some volatility there. Right now, I'm going to go right away to the real yield. 2.16% is a lower real yield. And Paul Sweeney's 5-year yield launches away from 5%, 4.9%. 4.91%, Paul. Your observation?
Let me just report some of these numbers here. The headline, PCE deflator month on month, 0.3%. That's smack in line with consensus. It's right in line with where we saw it last month as well. The PCE core deflator, let's do that on a year-over-year basis. That kind of gives a number that people think about. 2.8%. Again, that was right in line with expectations and right in line with last month's period as well. So as Tom called it, these numbers coming right in line with where the survey work was, and you can read it any way you want. And as Tom was mentioning, we do have futures lifting the S&P now up about 7 points.
Unfair to speak to Neil Duta now. We haven't seen the revised statistics yet, but I'm going to say they're somewhat lighter as well. Neil Duta, does a negative statistic for inflation-adjusted personal spending, is that a precursor for inflation-adjusted negative wages out into the rest of 2024?
Well, I mean, I mean, to me, the data on real consumption is a reminder that growth is not getting away from the Fed. You know, going into the year, Tom, I mean, there was a lot of enthusiasm for economic strength. I think the consensus has largely adjusted to that, right? I mean, we went into the year very downbeat on growth as a consensus, and now people have adjusted, I think, to where they should be. And you're going to likely see a more mixed data flow now because people are generally speaking, have adjusted. I mean, growth was never going to be as weak as it was, as people thought it would be at the end of last year. Now we're kind of more in the 2 to 2.5% camp. So you should expect to see a more mixed kind of data flow relative to consensus now. But yeah, I mean, it just demonstrates that growth isn't getting away from the Fed. And when you think about consumption, you know, remember that in recent months, we had seen a bit, I think before the revisions, I mean, we did see a meaningful decline in the savings rate. So there's a limit to how much you can draw down savings to finance consumption.
Right.
So, you know, you'd expect to see consumer spending follow the growth in incomes more so. And, you know, as I mentioned, you know, wage growth has been moderating. So it's not all that surprising to see consumption, you know, slowing a little bit here.
Key economic data. We're commercial free for this hour. Paul, why don't you continue with Mr. Dutta?
So, Neil, I guess if you look at this data, I mean, there's certainly a camp out there that I think would look at this data and kind of what we've seen over the last several months and say, my Federal Reserve can stay right where they are. They don't need to do anything here. Let's let these higher rates for longer do their job in pulling inflation down. How do you think about that?
I mean, I think you want to put that argument on as short of a leash as possible.
Okay.
I think that's, frankly, you never have as much time as you think. The risks with the economy are always nonlinear in nature. I'll just leave it at that. Yep. I think to me, it's frankly dangerous. You know, I mean, as a policymaker, your job, I mean, you're not a business economist. My job is to try to position clients for upside. Their job is to try to protect things from the downside. It's a risk management job, okay? And what we know, I mean, core inflation came in on the nose, 0.2. I think it was 0.25 if you round it out to the 2 decimal points.
Oh, listen to you.
And you know, I remember Waller in a recent speech talking about, you know, I look forward to the day when I don't have to, you know, look at it like out to 3 decimal places. That might actually happen sooner.
Okay, but this is a final question, Neil Duta. This is really, really important. As you say, we've gotten out to 3 decimal points. I'm as guilty of this. The only one I know doesn't go to 3 decimal points is Lisa Mateo.
Right.
I mean, she's the only one I know.
She does.
Neil Duta, it's just simply the great, great call here of my Economist of 2023 is you said, I'm sorry, productivity is there, animal spirit's there, and we will clear markets to continue to prosper. Have you changed your tune at all?
Well, the only thing I have a real bone to pick with is on inflation. I think there's not as much upside to growth estimates. There's plenty of downside to inflation estimates relative to the consensus. So the consensus has come closer to me on the economy, but I think moved further away on inflation. And so for me, I think the momentum under inflation is lower. I think core inflation will. I mean, you can't rule out a 0.1 a couple of times here and there between now and the December meeting. You can't rule that out. And once that starts to happen, look for the bond markets to rally. So I think if I had to pick, I mean, as a market economist, stocks or bonds, I would pick bonds because either growth is steady and inflation slows, in which case bond markets rally, or growth starts slowing and inflation will continue to slow, in which case bonds rally a lot. So there's an asymmetry here in the market, I think, in favor of fixed income.
Neil Duta, thank you so much. Really treasure the view here at 8:30 on FAIR. Of course, with Renaissance Macro, look for Mr. Dutta and Jeff DeGraff's good literature. You'll see that on Twitter and LinkedIn as well. Our economic indicators, always including this important day, brought to you by Commonwealth, supporting more than 2,000 independent financial advisors with the solutions they need to grow a thriving business. Commonwealth, go where you grow. Visit commonwealth.com to learn more. And again, the PC, Paul, what's your key statistic here before we get to Margie?
Again, I'm going to call out the core deflator year over year because I think that's the number that people tend to grapple with. 2.8%, Tom. I mean, it's not 2%, but it's certainly solidly below 3%. So it's that sticky kind of last little move lower in inflation. So the Fed can look at it either way. But as Neil was suggesting, he thinks perhaps cuts sooner rather than later.
Our booking's gotten better over the last couple of weeks. Eric is in charge of our booking, working 24/7, and Giuseppe, one of our interns, has really helped out.
He's helping out
in the last couple of days. I think he maybe at Fordham or Notre Dame. I can't remember where Giuseppe is. But the basic idea here is the booking, when you go from Bob Michael talking about high yield, and I'm quoting Felix Smith of Putnam, and you wander over to Margie Patel, well, that's the way to do it. With Allspring Global Investments, with a heritage and knowledge here of yield, Margie Patel joins us this morning. Is the new yield, Margie, dividend growth?
Well, I do think that stocks are more attractive than bonds because the absolute level of yields is so low. I think the numbers just aren't going to work. I think it still says that stocks with a dividend but with capital appreciation is going to be the winning sector this year.
So, Margie, looking at the inflation data today, how do you think this Federal Reserve is going to look at that in terms of how it's setting its rates here?
Well, probably a sense of relief that they don't need to do anything. And I think what we're going to see from the Fed is more just watchful waiting and do nothing and hope that inflation more or less is around this level or maybe ticks a little lower.
So if it's watchful waiting on the Fed here, Margie, I guess I'm going to turn my focus back to good old-fashioned earnings here. And it seemed like, I don't know, the earnings were generally pretty good for the first quarter. Guidance, okay. I don't know. But the earnings story seems to be okay. How do you guys think about it?
Well, that's exactly what companies said. And if you think about it, first quarter growth was only 1.3% revised down, yet earnings growth was up 10% in the quarter for Standard & Poor's companies. I think revenue was up 4%. So that says to me that the economy is not the same as the, say, Standard & Poor's 500. S&P can do a lot better than the economy overall. Companies have said they're really looking forward to more of the same. So I think it's going to continue to be growth of the economy, say maybe 2%, earnings maybe 10%. That's why I think stocks are still attractive this year.
Margie, I'm bringing up the old Boston Guard today, and Bob Michael over at J.P. Morgan was really talking a lot like the Loomis sales legend Daniel Fuss, who you know so well, and that credit upgrade may be a surprise here. Within the span of Allspring's work, with a persistent good GDP, with Ed Yardeni's roaring 20s, do we get the shock of credit upgrade across the universe?
No, I think the high yield market is in great shape. They restructured their balance sheets when rates were near zero, like investment grade companies. So they really could withstand even a mild recession. But it looks as if more of the same. The public market has better quality names than the private debt market. So I think we should expect the spreads just grind narrower. And we should see very, very modest default rates under 4%, which is where the default rate's been running. Makes it pretty attractive.
So on the equity side, Margie, if this economy is kind of hanging in there, maybe doing a little bit better than hanging in there, is it worth kind of, taking a look at maybe industrial stocks, thinking that maybe this we're going to see a lot of investment in this economy in infrastructure, as an example. How about industrial stocks?
Well, we haven't. I think that is an attractive sector because people have been avoiding that, feeling Fed raises rates, we get a recession. You don't want anything economic recessive like industrials. But there are a number of industrial companies that are really tied to the long-term secular growth themes, the data centers, expanding the electrical grid, improving transmission, reshoring, capital investment. So all those things, I think, favor those industrial companies that are able to take advantage of those trends. So it's been a sector that outperformed this year. I think it'll continue to outperform.
Margie, before I let you go here this morning, I'm sorry, but it's in the ether. It's like the big tech companies have maybe sipped the Patel Kool-Aid. Like maybe they actually are going to pay dividends. Do you see a new regime where fancy tech boys actually pay dividends?
Well, we've seen that trend now for a couple of years where, in fact, tech companies have started to pay dividends, mostly rather modest. And I think more it's a question of what they think the best use of capital is. And I think historically they've been more rewarded by buying back stock than paying a dividend. So I think it's more a balance of where they see the best bang for their buck.
Margie Patel, thank you so much with Allspring this morning. What a privilege, folks, to have Bob Michael and Margie Patel in the same hour. This is what it's about when clipping coupons. We welcome all of you commercial-free in this important economic hour for the nation. Markets move, they lift. It's fractional, but come on, take it. Small cap, the Russell up 0.6%. Lori Calvasine is the only one happy in New York today over at RBC. Even Bitcoin lifts this morning. I mean, what do you want? The 10-year real yield comes in 3 basis points, 2.16%. David Gura awaiting at the Trump Tower at 9 a.m. this morning for the former president's comments at 11 a.m. Paul, what's your observation right now?
We're going to bring those comments to you live, Tom, at 11 a.m. Wall Street time. Just looking at the markets here, lifting a little bit, Tom, as you suggested here. I guess if you look at this economic data, you could take it any way you want, but there's certainly no reason for the Fed to hike. It just remains a question of when they will bring rates down.
First time I've mentioned this today, Japan announcing formally their intervention expense of 62 gazillion, whatever. That came out earlier off of our Tokyo desk. And I'm sorry, into the Monday morning in Japan, Sunday evening here, maybe once again, we're on an intervention watch. That's just speculation on my part. I have to speculate now. Lisa Mateo's had her third Costco hot dog. With our Bloomberg Business Flash, Lisa Mateo.
Good morning. Yeah, we've seen a change in the markets. We went from red on the screen to green on the screen now. So a little bit of a lift from earlier after the PCE deflator month to month, year to year came in line with consensus. Same for the PCE core deflator. So right now we have NASDAQ futures and Dow futures up 0.2%. S&P futures up 0.3% or 19 points. The 2-year yield 4.91%. That's down 1 basis point. The 10-year yield 4.51%, and that's down 2 basis points. In other news, we have shares of Paramount Global. They're up nearly 1%. And this is after sources say David Ellison has sweetened his bid for the company. And then sources saying Hertz working with advisors on options to raise financing. Now, it's not clear if it's looking to new equity, debt, or a mix of both. Those shares up nearly 1%. And finally, Bloomberg reporting beer brands. They're banking on health-conscious consumers with a push for alcohol-free beer at the Olympics. I'm telling you, at the Olympics, Anheuser-Busch InBev is advertising zero alcohol Corona Cero. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom and Paul.
Is it
Corona
like
Cero.
Is it
Cero.
like been there, done that?
Yeah, I mean, come on. What are we doing here?
I mean, you're going to Nashville next week.
We are. We're going big.
The cool, when you played down there years ago, you drank alcohol-free beer so you could get ready for your 15 minutes of fame. The stuff was garbage. I mean, it was like Coors 3.2. You don't even know what that is, young Sweeney. We're bringing it back again. Oh, Ari, thank you. Cero in Spanish is zero.
Yes.
I needed to know that.
I got a 5 on my AP Spanish. Okay, I'll let you know.
They got. I look at the control room. They got a case of Colt 45 going there on a Friday as well. I got to go to Paramount. I'm sorry. We're sweetening the bid. You don't announce you're sweetening the bid unless you've already spoken to the acquiree, right?
The reason the market's not moving is the market doesn't view Mr. Ellison and Skydance as really that credible of a bidder here. We'll have to see what kind of capital he has behind his deal, but I think that's why the market's just kind of tepid towards this whole Paramount situation here.
Deeps nails it. O'Doul's.
Yes.
What was that?
Yes, exactly.
Thank you out on live chat for bringing it back like 3 Tom
my
Keens
goodness.
ago as well. We are she's never had an alcohol-free beer in her life. Frances Donald joins us now from Manulife Investment Management. Just wonderful. We did a great panel in Toronto. It was on fire.
Nice.
Frances Donald, from that panel in Toronto, when I went and saw the New Jersey Devils play the Toronto Maple Leafs. Thank you, Redo, keeper of the Amex, for that. Frances, from that panel you and I did with David Rosenberg 2 months ago, how has your view changed?
It hasn't. Actually, I just looked up on ChatGPT. Give me examples of words for periods without any action that is temporary, because I was trying to come up with a clever way to say we're in a holding pattern, Tom. Especially in the United States, we are waiting for more information. Was Q1 inflation temporary? Where will jobs go? The balance of risks is that jobs deteriorate from this moment forward, but we got to get that June, July, August data. The Fed is not going to be cutting before September, but we need more information. And so week to week, it's bits and bobs on the U.S. economy. Now, that's true for the U.S. It's not true elsewhere. We had a big PCE number this morning in the U.S. We're not talking about that on our team over at Manulife. We're talking about intervention in Japan. Might seem small, huge downward revision on Canadian GDP. Canada escaped a recession by a decimal point in Q3, Q4. We have the ECB cutting next week, the BOC cutting next week. There's a lot of movement in the world, but not so much in the U.S. I think that's the more interesting macro picture now.
We're getting on to a late jobs report, June 7. The survey's still 180,000. I'm sorry, Francis, 180,000 non-farm payrolls is still maybe not robust, but I'm going to borrow from Bob Sinch, a solid American economy?
Yeah, it's not a problem. It's not a problem. And this is the big issue facing the Fed, is that the balance of risks is tilting towards an acceleration of weakness in the U.S., but inflation is still above target and the job market has not deteriorated. We like to say on our team, when the Fed starts cutting rates, you won't be asking why. If the Fed cut rate in the next 2 months, we'd all be shaking our heads saying why. So they just don't have the data. Now, that said, when we forecast what's ahead, we think they will have enough data by September, but they don't have it now, which is why they can't cut in June, July, and they have to wait.
Thank God we're commercial free this hour with key economic data and the markets lifting off it. SPX up 17 points now, first green in days. The live chat on YouTube is lit up like a candle. Paul, this is too much. Brent, thank you so much. Alcohol-free Corona is Sprite. There you go.
That's exactly.
There's the marketing.
I agree, totally.
Brent, thank you for that wisdom.
So, Francis, here you talked about the B of E cutting rates, the European Central Bank cutting rates soon. I mean, a lot of folks out there, Francis, would say, my Federal Reserve is behind the curve here. They should be cutting now. What do you say to those folks?
Well, I say this is actually very atypical, and I think that's what's causing problems. Historically, the Fed goes first, everybody else follows, EMs go last. The cycle has been so fundamentally different. EMs are almost done their cutting cycle. We have several developed markets who are cutting ahead of the Fed. I think this is actually creating some problems, and I was talking to my team today. We're so used to saying the Fed only cares about what's happening domestically, and the Fed is the ruler of all other central banks. But the Fed is also going to care about some of the global disruptions that is coming from them being last or near last. We've got the RBA and the BOJ, of course, that are still on the hawkish glance. And so the number one question that I get is, what are we doing with currency risk in countries that need to cut rates because their economy is weakening but can't diverge too substantially from the Fed? So I think we might see some subtle, or I'd like to see some subtle references from the Fed of some of the chaos that's being created by the Fed going later. At the end of the day, though, these central banks have their own domestic mandates. The Fed doesn't have justification to cut. These other central banks that are cutting absolutely have to get on the ball, or else they're going to risk bigger recessions and potentially larger rate divergences.
Well, that's kind of where I want to go, Francis. I mean, there are a lot of folks out there that are saying, boy, the more this Fed waits here in terms of cutting rates, the more we raise the risk of an accident happening in the marketplace or something worse. what's that risk to you? Yeah, I pay attention.
Was Dell an accident?
Oh,
waiting
how
to
about
happen?
those guys? Yeah.
You know, there are a lot of things that are different in this post-COVID economy, but I am still a traditionalist in the sense that I think basic economic relationships hold. Higher rates exist to bring down demand, and we have seen already a few small accidents that occur. But I think we bury the lead a little bit when we hear economists talk about, oh, it's going to be a soft landing and the Fed's only going to cut 3 times. Well, the question is, if they don't cut pretty significantly, what does the next recession look like? Maybe it's not a 2024, maybe it's not even a 2025, but that recession is likely to be much worse. And perhaps the one that really keeps me up at night is if the Fed went through one of the most aggressive hiking cycles that we've seen in our generation.
Is that my headphones or is that Francis Donald?
I think that's
up?
Francis.
We're going to leave her. We got some technical difficulties there with Francis Donald. Thank you, Francis Donald. What's great, I mean, our bookers, they have it nailed.
Yeah.
When you can segue from a Montreal Canadiens fan to
right
a Boston
into a
Bruins
Yep.
fan, it's like, kumbaya. I mean, it's that good. Joining us now to stagger to June 7th is Michael McKee. I make jokes about it, but I have a different prism of economics. McKee's prism is immense acuity to get, in this case, to get to June 7th. With that acuity, what matters to the jobs report?
The PCE report was just a few minutes ago.
Yes,
the PCE is dead. Long live the new.
But it was like it was basically a yawn.
Yeah.
We got yields lower, a lift, but Ian Lingen says that's it.
There's much more of a chance for a surprise with the jobs report because it has surprised with its strength, and then last month sort of teased everybody by coming in what we used to consider strong, but weaker than the 200,000 some odd. So we're looking for about 175 to 180,000. Those numbers will get adjusted as we get things like JOLTS, jobs claims, ADP next week, the ISM numbers, but something in the range that we had the last month, and then no change in unemployment. Right. That would be a surprise for Wall Street if unemployment went up. If it went down, it might scare people a little bit. And then we'll look at wages, average hourly earnings, and we just got some good news on that for the Fed in the PCE report because wages only went up 0.2 after 0.6 the month before.
I don't know why that's good news. Most people would like to see wages.
Well, it depends on whether you're trying to spend your own money or whether you're trying to keep inflation down.
I'm with Elizabeth Warren on this. Why are we worrying about putting people out of work? Mike McKee, as simple as I can, what's the stagflation discussion into the weekend? I don't see it.
No.
But do you see stagflation?
No, it's way too early to even think something like that could be happening. We saw spending go down, particularly on goods, and a lot of that was automobiles in this last report, but that's also April news rather than what's currently happening in May. We'll have to wait on that report. But the Fed has raised interest rates. The idea is to cool demand and to slow the economy. So that seems to be what's happening. And inflation is still ticking down, not falling significantly, but the core was up only 0.2 this last month.
That's what I'm looking at.
We don't have a stag yet, and we don't have inflation yet, to sort of paraphrase Jay Powell.
But again, that's the number I'm looking at. PCE core deflator. It's on my Bloomberg terminal. That means it's got to be important. 0.2% month to month. That's good, right?
That's good, yes. That's the kind of thing that if it's repeated for a couple more months, will give the Fed a lot more confidence.
I know what I'm talking about,
inflation is going down.
The only time I listen to Mike McKee, I have to have a beverage in my hand. And I had one, I think it was 2 afternoons ago, with your brilliant introductory report on Beth Hammock of the Cleveland Fed. This is Stanford quantitative finance history, first class out of Goldman Sachs. What will she bring to the table coming from finance?
A lot of market experience at a time when the Fed is dealing with the market impacts of the quantitative tightening situation, bringing down the balance sheet. She's got a lot of experience with that. And obviously financing the U.S. government is going to have an impact on the economy and monetary policy since we have such a big hole to fill. So she'll be able to bring some expertise in that area.
We don't care. All we had you in for is Panthers-Rangers. Can the Rangers get through the weekend and beat the Panthers?
Panthers look awfully good. And you know, this will upset all our New York fans in the control room and things. But
Rich is so upset he didn't come in today.
No, but Paul Maurice is the coach of the Florida Panthers, and he has coached more games than anybody who's never won a Stanley Cup. So, you know, if it can't be Boston, then let Paul have his ring.
All right.
I'm making my Jackson Hole plans here,
I'm ready to carry
48
Mike's
hours.
bags.
I mean, to me, it's going to be fascinating. I mean, you know, we had Eichengreen on yesterday with his paper from last summer.
It'd be fun to see Jay Powell come out and say, "Well, it's an election year. I don't really want to talk."
And where do we get a steak and a beer out there?
We're the $1 Million Cowboy.
Okay, there we go. All right,
There
very
we
good.
go.
Just make my
When
reservation.
McKee shows up, we play Clapton. Cream, Layla, good morning.
is Bloomberg Surveillance with Tom Keene and Paul Sweeney.
Apple's still minting more money than God, right?
Geopolitics front and center for global Wall Street.
With Lisa Mateo on markets.
Stocks are coming off of another record high.
And Michael Barr with news.
U.S. Secretary of State discussed the conflict in Gaza.
The best in economics, finance, investment, and international relations. This is Bloomberg Surveillance on Bloomberg Radio.
Good morning across this nation. Tom Keene and Paul Sweeney with you, the 9 o'clock hour, 2 hours away from scheduled comments from the former president of the United States, an historic morning after the shock of announcements last night on 34 counts. Our David Gura will join us in moments, and then Margaret Brennan of CBS News. To have Gura and Brennan with us is to start strong in this hour. Off of the economic data of 30 minutes ago, a lift to the market. Paul, your observation off of the economic data that we saw.
Yeah, I think the market's viewing this positively, Tom. We've got the S&P up about 0.3%, NASDAQ up about the same here. Yields on the 10-year coming in slightly, Tom, off about 3-4 basis points. We're now at 4.5% on the 10-year.
It's going to be a rich weekend, I think. A lot of people are going to be writing and adjusting to the June 7 jobs report as well. Let's get to it. From the Interactive Brokers studio in New York City, our Bloomberg Business Flash, Lisa Mateo.
Good morning. Yeah, futures seeing a lift, and this is after the Fed's preferred inflation gauge came right in line with economists' expectations. So we have NASDAQ futures up 0.2%, up 46 points. Dow futures up 0.1%, 72 points. S&P futures up 0.3%, or 15 points. The 2-year yield 4.91%, down 1 basis point. The 10-year yield 4.51%, that's down 3 basis points. What's moving the markets? It's certainly Dell, because it's under pressure this morning, down 16%. After its AI server sales failed to impress investors. We have other news this morning. UBS Group completed its merger with former rival Credit Suisse. UBS ADRs, they're up nearly 1%. And over to HSBC, sources say the firm plans to pick outgoing CEO Noel Quinn's successor by July. HSBC ADRs up nearly 0.5%. And what about when it comes to possible successor for Jamie Dimon over at JP Morgan? Why I bring this up? Well, it's because Ann Partners on our YouTube live chat says Tom Keene for the new JPM CEO. There you go. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash, Tom.
That's like a real job. I mean, Dimon's working like 30 hours a week.
Oh, yeah.
You know, it's
he's
tough.
Building a new building there on
Yeah,
Park
you know,
Avenue.
I see it when I come in. You know, I take the Bentley down the street. I'll see Jamie out. He's out early running.
Sure.
You know, he's in Central Park. Miles in.
Yep.
I wave. He laughs at me. That's the way it works. Thank you, Lisa, for that. We say good morning to all of you. Let's get right to it. Before we speak with Margaret Brennan of CBS News, let us speak to David Gura of Bloomberg News. Of course, the big take. Mr. Gura is ensconced somewhere between Prada and Gucci outside the Trump Tower. David, an update on what you expect at 11 o'clock this morning.
Well, that's when Donald Trump is going to address reporters, and by virtue of being proxies for the public, them as well. He's going to go to the atrium of the Trump Tower here on Fifth Avenue and deliver some remarks. We expect him to take some questions from reporters as well, and I think it's safe to say we're going to hear a lot of reiteration of what he said over the course of the 5-6 week long trial about his complaints about how it was conducted and who oversaw it, and what he sees as kind of a miscarriage of justice as he pushes ahead to the election in November, Tom.
Do you expect him to get to other themes like follow on other cases or getting to the Republican convention? Where does he go from the expected criticisms of this case?
Well, if past his prologue, we're going to hear a lot about other issues as well, and we'll see how coherent that argument is that he's going to make. Just going back to what he said during the course of the trial, at those press availabilities in the lobby of the courthouse, he would bring up immigration, he would bring up foreign policy and the economy. I expect that he'll wind into those areas in these comments as well. But I think what I'm keen to see is the degree to which this is weighing on him. Obviously, if anyone's picked up a newspaper this morning, it's front and center and in very bold font that he is now a convicted felon. And I think what I'm keen to see is the degree to which that's resonating with him and weighing on him. And certainly that should come across this morning when he makes those remarks.
David, do you expect to hear anything from the former president regarding any potential sentencing here? Because we'll get that next month, just before the convention.
Yeah, it's just weeks away. Judge Juan Merchan in this case setting that sentencing date of July the 11th. And I think we are listening to see when the former president plans to make his appeal. His lawyers on television last night saying they plan to do that as soon as possible. Any insight that we can get from the former president to sort of what that process looks like, how he's viewing it, and how that might play out will be interesting to hear. And, of course, with that sentencing date looming, his attorneys will be writing memos on his behalf,
Right.
sort of recommending that he not be sentenced, I assume, and we'll see if we get any insight into that for him, too.
David Gura, thank you so much. Reporting at 10 o'clock as a crowd assembles on Fifth Avenue in New York. Thrilled to tell you folks, Joe Matthew will be with Paul and Alex Steele for the 11 o'clock speech, which will take worldwide and across this nation. It is a perfect time, an historic moment to speak with Margaret Brennan of Face the Nation. Of course, you can see Face the Nation, the CBS television network, Sunday morning, if they can get to it with the guest surge that's going on and the emotions of the moment. And of course, hear it on Bloomberg Radio Sunday afternoon. I just think you have the perfect guest, Margaret. It's fascinating to see Preet Bharara darken the door of Face the Nation Sunday morning. How will you speak to the former U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of New York?
Ask him about this decision by the Manhattan DA, Alvin Bragg, to go ahead with this case. When I spoke to Preet a year ago, he was saying, it was surprising to him in some ways that this case was going forward, but that he had the utmost confidence in Alvin Bragg. And remember, this was a high-stakes decision to make to even take on this case. And we saw this prosecution. So we want to talk to the former head of the Southern District of New York office to understand why the SDNY initially passed on this case,
right.
Why the Manhattan DA went ahead and had this successful conviction, and we want to ask about other legal matters as well.
I mean, Margaret, the bottom line is if you hire for your defense Wilmer, Cutler, Pickering, Howland, Dorr, you're supposed to listen to your lawyers. Does CBS report that former President Trump did not listen to his lawyers?
I don't think we've ever reported he does listen to his lawyers in any case or advisors. He takes his own counsel.
Margaret, within Washington, D.C. here, waking up to this news here after having several hours to digest it, what's the feeling within the Beltway as to, does this matter and how does this matter?
I mean, that's been the question for so long. But I do have to say to you, it was stunning to see as we go into the news reporting mode, the 34 felony count convictions, falsifying business records in pursuit of benefiting his 2016 campaign that he won. I mean, just hearing that a former American president is a convicted felon is still a wow moment. And digesting what that means, I think, is something we're all in the process of. I've had very basic questions from folks who haven't followed this saying, can he vote? The answer is yes. Can he be elected to office? The answer is yes. I don't know that we fully appreciate what this means yet. We will have some polling on this. We will talk about that. But what we do know is that, at least on the mechanics, that both the Biden campaign and the Trump campaign have been fundraising off of this.
Yeah, exactly. So Face the Nation this Sunday. Margaret, in addition to Mr. Bharara, who do you have?
We'll have Doug Burgum, the sitting governor of the state of North Dakota, who has been in that courtroom with Mr. Trump and is on his short list to be potentially a running mate. And we want to talk to him about what this means. We also need to talk about the threat environment that either this convicted felon, who might be the next commander-in-chief, will face, or the current unpopular president might face or continue to face. We have General McKenzie, the former commander of CENTCOM, with a new book that documents what it was like for him to oversee the chaotic withdrawal from Afghanistan, the decision-making that happened on the part of Mr. Trump leading to that, but also the killing of key Iranian general. We want to talk about some of the bigger picture process questions about what another Trump administration could look like.
And no doubt subject to change off of the comments of the
Absolutely.
former president here at 11 a.m. Margaret Brennan, find a moment in the weekend to find a bit of quiet. Margaret Brennan, of course, leading the coverage at Face the Nation across the CBS television network Sunday morning. Hear Face the Nation in its entirety, Bloomberg Radio, 2 p.m. in New York, Washington, D.C., and Bloomberg 106.1, Boston, Newburyport. Face the Nation this Sunday at 2 on Bloomberg Radio. Just absolutely extraordinary where we are right now. Bob, what am I doing? Am I going to Michael Barr? I mean, is that the next thing I'm doing? Is he weighed in on the Lisa Mateo's alcohol-free beer thing? I don't think they had that in Detroit.
They don't have that in
his
Detroit.
youth. What?
Yes, see?
Lisa's talking about Corona-free is where we're heading.
Yes, Corona Cero.
I tried to explain Colt 45, and somebody said in my ear, Michael Barr's the only one that will know what Colt 45 is.
I'm going to have one when I go home,
There
just
you
to say,
go.
Lisa, here.
Why did I know that? With our news in New York City, Michael Barr.
Thank you very much, Tom, Paul, and Lisa. Donald Trump will hold a news conference this morning after yesterday's historic verdict in his New York hush money trial. The former president will speak at 11 a.m. in front of Trump Tower, and Bloomberg will carry it live. Meanwhile, Trump's former fixer and lawyer and the prosecution's star witness, Michael Cohen, was asked by ABC's Good Morning America if there was any single moment on the stand that stood out to him.
I really didn't have a single moment that was tougher than the 21 hours that they had me on the stand, whether it was on direct or on cross-examination. The whole thing was very tough. It's emotionally draining because you have to be perfect.
Trump was convicted of 34 counts of falsifying business records to hide hush money payments to an adult film star before the 2016 election. A Bloomberg News Morning Consult poll in January found 53% of swing state voters would be unlikely to vote for Trump if convicted. That includes 17% of Trump voters. Could that hold now that Trump has been convicted? Jeannie Sheehan-Zaino is a Bloomberg Politics contributor.
You know, this election is going to be fought, some people say in 3 states, other people say 6 to 7 states, by thousands of people in just those very few states. So if you're looking at, even at the lowest level, 5 to 7% of Donald Trump supporters who say they may either stay home or look to somebody else, you bet this can change the election. That's gotta be a big concern for him.
Professor Jeannie Sheehan-Zaino joined us this morning on Bloomberg Daybreak. Germany has joined the United States in authorizing Ukraine to hit some targets on Russian soil with the long-range weapons they are supplying. Today's move is a significant policy change that comes as depleted Ukrainian troops are losing ground in the war. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Michael Barr, and this is Bloomberg. Tom, Paul, Lisa.
Michael Barr, thanks so much. Paul, I'm trying to find a way to meld what we do in economics, finance, investment, and international relations with what we're going to see with our coverage at 11 a.m., the comments from the former president. And in the zeitgeist, just in the last 48 hours, has been, what do we do with the Trump tax cuts in 2025 when they expire?
Right, yep.
And I would suggest to President Trump, whatever the makeup of Senate and House, would really put that front and center, is his legacy.
I think you would agree. I mean, that was certainly a big topic and a big achievement for the Trump administration early in their administration here. So, but I'm not sure we're going to hear that today. I think today is going to be kind of what we've heard from him at the courtroom over the last several days. And it feels a lot like what we see out on the campaign trail these days, Tom.
Just to give you a window into how do we put the show together, I didn't mention this to anybody last night as we blew up the show off this historic announcement. But our next guest, for all of you worldwide, whatever you think about this event with a former president, to have Nick Akerman with us, that name is just exactly who I wanted yesterday at 7 p.m. Thrilled to bring you Nick Akerman next. This is Bloomberg Surveillance.
markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
And this Bloomberg Business Flash brought to you by Interactive Brokers Bond Marketplace. Access their vast selection of over 1 million global fixed income securities with no markups or built-in spreads and low transparent commissions. Learn more at ibkr.com/bonds. All right, we've got green on the screen after kind of a step in the right direction for policymakers looking for reassurance they can start lowering rates. The PCE deflator moderated in April. Right now we have NASDAQ futures up 0.1%, 30 points. The Dow futures up 0.1% as well, up 59 points, and S&P futures up 0.2%, 14 points. The 2-year yield 4.91%, down 1 basis point. The 10-year yield 4.51%, and that's down 4 basis points. We have spot gold higher at $2,357 an ounce. Brent crude $81 a barrel. WTI crude $78 a barrel. To earnings we go. Shares of Gap still soaring, up 25%. Its earning beat, and it also had an upgraded to its outlook on top of that. Now Nordstrom, on the flip side, their shares are lower, down 3%. Revenue topped estimates, but the thing is the company reported a wider than expected first quarter loss. That's why those shares are lower. And you have beauty retailer Ulta, shares higher, up 9%. First quarter earnings per share came in way ahead of estimates. And finally, Costco, their shares are lower, down about 0.5%. Third quarter profit, revenue, same store sales, that all beat forecast, but investors, they were looking for a little bit more in their member numbers. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom and Paul.
Lisa, thanks so much. I note the 10-year yield 2.14%. We're continuing to look at the markets 12 minutes away from the market opening, but we are focused on 11 a.m., our David Gura outside Trump Tower. Last night in the vicinity of 7 p.m., as the Detroit Tigers were doing what they do to the Boston Red Sox, I sat on my cell phone in shock over these announcements. The speed of the verdict for me as an amateur, all 34 counts for me as an amateur. And I turned to the team, we're texting back and forth like everybody does today, and there's only one person I wanted to talk to. Simply put, is a Ute out of Amherst, UMass Amherst in Harvard. He worked with Leon Jaworski. That's all you have to know.
Yep.
Nick Akerman joins us now with decades of experience in the American judicial system. Nick, my first question is simple. How will this verdict affect the other matters of litigation that Donald Trump faces?
I don't know as if it will affect it directly. It really, right now, those other matters have been delayed for various reasons. The big item is in Washington, D.C. and Atlanta, where they're waiting to see what the Supreme Court does with the immunity argument that Trump set forth. So I think that one really hinges on the immunity. But I think it does cast a whole different pale on these other cases, which most people have said are probably more serious in some ways,
right,
although I would agree with that. But it certainly puts the pressure to get those cases moving and get them into court and tried.
What does an appeal court look like? I think even if we didn't have TV cameras there, we had the great artist sketches, and I think we know what, Nick, Paul Drake, Perry Mason, I got it down cold. But Nick, what does an appeal court actually look like?
Well, you're saying an appeals court to appeal this conviction.
Yes. What does the actual what do you do at an appeals court?
Well, what you do is you go up to, there's two podiums, one for the person who's appealing and the other for the person who's opposing the appeal. In this case, it'll be the prosecution opposing the appeal, and it'll be Trump making the appeal. And you've got, in this case, in the first department, there'll be 5 judges that will hear that appeal. And so the only argument they really have is to try and somehow dredge out arguments based on the law to appeal this conviction, because essentially once you have a jury verdict and they've decided on the credibility of the witnesses and the facts, there's not much to appeal after that. And I don't think there's much to appeal either on the legal portion of this. So I don't think this appeal is going to go very far for Donald Trump.
All right, Nick, then let's turn to the sentencing aspect of this case, July 11th. What are the scenarios? What are the most likely sentencing scenarios, Nick?
Well, before January 11th, there's going to be a couple of reports that you're going to see. I guess we won't see them until the time of sentencing, but Probation does a report that's provided to the court. Both sides provide sentencing memoranda to the court. The question, of course, is whether or not the DA's office asks for jail time. And if they do, whether or not Judge Merchan will provide jail time. My opinion is that based on at least the fact that Michael Cohen served 3 years for these violations, and that Alan Weisselberg, the CFO of Trump Org, who was instrumental in setting up the phony corporate records on this and the payments that went out to reimburse Michael Cohen, he's already served 3 months in Rikers Island for unrelated matters, and now he's serving 3 months, another 3 months in Rikers Island for lying, and it's pretty clear that he has not cooperated against Donald Trump. And I think the judge is going to have to consider that here are two people that were instrumental in this crime that did serve jail time. And I find it hard to believe that he is not going to feel compelled to give Donald Trump at least some jail time.
Wow.
In what way? I mean, I wish I could stop the clock here on the show. Nick Akerman, I can't. I mean, what is it? Weekend jail time? I mean, is it something creative and different? Or is it, are you telling me the former president of the United States could enjoy a month at Rikers Island?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think what they'd have to do is create a presidential suite at Rikers Island because the Secret Service has to be there with him, obviously. But I think there is a very strong likelihood that he is going to be sentenced to imprisonment.
Will he be protected from other prisoners? I'll just be as direct about it as I can.
Absolutely. I don't see how in any way he can be put into the general population. I just don't see that happen.
What does he need to say at 11 a.m.? Nick Akerman, we're running out of time, unfortunately. What does the former president of the United States have to say at 11 a.m. to keep himself out of Rikers Island, Rikers prison?
At 11 a.m., I don't think there's anything he can say that's going to help him on that score. This is all going to be decided in the courts, just like the jury decided guilt or innocence. The judge is going to decide the punishment. And it's totally apart from anything that Donald Trump says at 11 a.m. In fact, if he says something that violates that gag order, he could wind up in jail a lot quicker, because now that he's been convicted by a jury of his peers, I think Judge Merchan's going to feel a lot more comfortable enforcing that gag order through imprisonment.
Yeah. Thank you for your service to Bloomberg, with Bloomberg Law, with June Grasso, and Balance of Power as well. Yep. Nick Akerman working with Leon Jaworski a few years ago as well. Paul, that was stunning.
That was...
I'm sorry, I was not prepared for that.
No, and Nick was pretty consistent all through this entire process that he thought that the president was in serious legal jeopardy with that particular case, and he was right there. So we think about the next stage. But I don't see
this in the... I mean, Gurr is up to speed. Gurr is my expert on this. But in the 18... I kid. I'm 18, I exaggerate. In the 9 newspapers I look at about every 4 hours, 24/7, what he just said... I haven't seen in those newspapers, including Bloomberg News.
Yeah, I mean, it's just, is what we have seen is this is such a new and unprecedented issue here for the courts to deal with, a former president being convicted of a felony. Where do you go from here? So, again, that's anyone's guess, but July 11th will be, I guess, the next key date there. And also, Nick pointing out that he thinks that the former president's appeal doesn't have much weight is also a key point there.
We'll have that on a replay. You'll see it on a 2-hour, 56-minute replay of Bloomberg Surveillance today. We do that out on YouTube. Really looking forward to that, to say the least. And also, Eric's working right now. We'll make that part of our single best idea podcast today. Those are just exceptional comments from a prosecutor who's practiced multiple federal prosecution back to Watergate. Nick Akerman, thank you so much for joining us. Well, after that conversation, the markets are sort of anticlimactic.
Yeah, we're going to get them open, though, Tom.
Get them open. The market's still open.
Yeah, the futures are up. S&P futures are up 0.2% on NASDAQ, up just slightly here. Yields pulling in a little bit. The 10-year Treasury, 4.5%.
Jason Furman of Harvard University on your inflation. We do that next. From New York City, Bloomberg Surveillance.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
In the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo alongside Tom Keene and Paul Sweeney with your opening bell report. So how are the markets going to react after the Fed's favorite inflation gauge cools and spending unexpectedly drops? You had core PCE increase 0.2 from the prior month, rose 2.8% from a year ago. And consumer spending unexpectedly fell 0.1%. Wage growth moderated on top of that. And all that said, let's get to the markets right now, which are open. S&P 500 will start there, up 0.1% or 8 points at 5,244. We have the Dow up 0.1% at 43 points at 38,155. And the Nasdaq up 0.2%, 34 points at 16,772. The 2-year yield 4.91%, down 1 basis point. The 10-year yield 4.51%, and that's down 3 basis points. Checking in with commodities, we have spot gold higher at $2,353 an ounce. Brent crude $81 a barrel. WTI crude $78 a barrel. At the open, we want to check in with Dell, down 15%. Its AI server sales will really failed to impress investors. That is your Bloomberg opening bell report. Tom and Paul.
Lisa, thanks so much. Betsy Stevenson and Justin Wolfers out in Ann Arbor have a textbook out which melds public policy into economics like nobody. About 10, 15 years ago, Rick Michigan over at Columbia did the same thing. Living that reality is Jason Furman of Harvard University. And all I can say, folks, you sit there and go, geez, I wish I had a briefing like they have at the White House. Or I wish I could just for 10 minutes sit in the back row of Ec 10. I won't ask any questions, but I just want to know what's going on. No one is out on Twitter conveying information about this post-pandemic time like Professor Ferman. He joins us now from Ec 10 at Harvard University. Jason, first of all, congratulations on your Twitter feed. Are you doing this, or is this a host of young freshmen at Harvard?
I'm doing it. I have somebody that helps me with the charts.
There we go. It's like Liz Ann Saunders at Schwab.
Yeah.
I mean, the kid from Pepperdine's doing it. I mean, not Liz Ann. Someone helps you with the charts. What's the most important chart right now? I'm going to go core services X something. What's your most important chart, Jason?
I think probably core PCE market-based. I haven't liked the imputed stuff being in there for a while. Back in 2022, it was lowering inflation because the stock market was falling. Now it's raising inflation because the stock market is rising. So I think more of a focus on market-based inflation is a good thing.
How do you describe, I mean, you're going to be, you're at Harvard now, but if you were down at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue, you're sitting on the couch with President Biden and you're going, look, people are getting buried by home insurance. Forget about this rent OER stuff. The fact is there's selected levels way above 2019. What would you advise President Biden?
Look, it's tough. I mean, inflation, he doesn't have a whole lot of control over. For him, there's the fiscal side. Most of that's with Congress. There are things like student loans that may end up costing $1 trillion, which are going the wrong way in all of this. But the most important thing he needs to think about over the next 5 months is he doesn't have a whole lot of control over this. The economy in some respects is really, really good, but people aren't wrong to be frustrated about the pace of real wage growth, the growth of prices.
All right, Jason, let's take a look at the consumer here. We had personal income come in at 0.3% positive today, right in line with expectations. Personal spending, a smidge light, 0.2%. But how do you see the consumer out there? A lot of folks are talking about a couple different consumers out there, actually.
Yeah, we're starting to see a little bit of slowing. On a real basis, consumer spending fell in April. It had been really strong in February and March. If you look at the year as a whole, it's up at about a 1% pace so far. Consumers, what kept us out of recession last year as the Fed raised rates over and over and over again, they're relaxing a little bit. The saving rate is around 3.5%. That could stay that way for some time. I don't think it can stay that way forever.
All right, so we got some more inflation data today. And Jason, presumably this Federal Reserve will be also looking at the employment environment. That seems pretty solid as well. We'll get some more data next week, but the labor market seems pretty solid as well.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. That's part of what's going on with rate cuts right now, is there's not much reason to cut them. Economy's growing well. Job growth is well. We're more nervous about inflation than we are comforted about inflation. So why move? And I think it's going to take a while for the Fed to be reassured. Back in December, they were looking at 6-month core PCE at a 1.9% annual rate. Now it's a 3.2% annual rate. This worm can turn very quickly. I think it's going to take a while before they can feel reassured enough to cut rates.
Jason, I want to conflate two questions here, which is unfair to you, but no one can handle it like you. You have led the charge with comparing 1 year, 6 month, 3-month annualized, et cetera, parsing out the timeline that we should choose to study inflation. In addition with this is the raging battle over this series or that series or this trimmed or that, Cleveland CPI, Furman CPI, whatever. Conflate those two ideas together. What's your best picture of how to measure inflation?
Look, I've been having fun with something I call the ecumenical underlying inflation measure.
Sounds like fun.
And I take, 8 different ways to measure inflation. I look at it over 3 different time horizons. That's 24 different numbers. And then I just take the median of all 24 of those. And, statistically, it actually works pretty well. It gives you a pretty good sense of what underlying inflation is. All that said, if I had to pick a conventional number, looking at 6-month core inflation is not a bad way to understand what's going on.
We don't want any East Ecton gossip here. Does ManQ believe in the gospel of Furman ecumenical inflation?
He's on the record saying he thinks inflation's coming down this year. He's optimistic about shelter growth slowing. He's said that before in public. I'm less sure that there's that much more slowing from where we are now. And I think there's some other shoes to drop, like goods prices aren't going to keep falling the way they have over the last 6 months.
I'm sorry, it's like Jeremy Bentham, his head's bronzed in some museum in England somewhere. I mean, we're back to Unitarian inflation here with an ecumenical approach. I mean,
Professor, there are a lot of folks out there in academia and in practice in the markets that say, forget about the first few months of 2024. Inflation's it's already whipped. We're in good shape. The Fed should be cutting now. The risk of not cutting is too great. What do you say to those folks?
I say that the inflation risk is quite asymmetric. They might be right. There might even be like a 40% chance they're right, but there's a 30% chance that inflation's going to be well above 3%. At which point we're in a really unacceptable place in terms of the Fed's credibility. So you do that type of risk analysis and it says don't cut. In general, the best forecast for the economy is that it's going to keep doing what it's done. And growth has been strong. Job growth has been strong. That's my best guess going forward. On the other hand, inflation's been elevated, and that probably should be your best guess going forward. So we're at an asymmetric place on the dual mandate right now.
I mean, Professor Furman, you're such a hitter. Did you do a speech at the University College of London, and did they show you the taxidermied head of Jeremy Bentham? Is that where we came up with ecumenical inflation?
I have not met Jeremy Bentham alive or dead.
Very good. There's news you can use from Bloomberg News today. Jason Ferman, thank you so much. And I can't say enough, folks, about his and his team's effort out on Twitter. Seriously, it is the best graphical presentation of where we are now. Don't kid yourself, Paul. Beth Kamrick, she's joining Cleveland Fed.
Yeah.
She's looking at the Furman feed
exactly.
24/7. I am sure of that as well. It's not the day to talk about the Bentham project, but at some point we'll get Julie on from UCL.
Yeah.
The professor there, and talk to her about an economist who taxidermied himself in 1850. It's a digression today. We are 90 minutes away from comments by the former president of the United States. We'll, of course, have complete coverage. David Gura leading our coverage from Trump Tower. Joe Matthews scheduled to be with Alex Steele and Paul Sweeney. The Dow up 138 points. With our news in New York City, Michael Barr.
Thank you very much, Tom, Paul, Lisa. And as you said, Tom, Donald Trump, he's going to hold a news conference about an hour and a half. Bloomberg will carry it live. Yesterday, the former president was convicted of felony crimes as a New York jury found him guilty of all 34 charges in his hush money trial. Trump is being sentenced on July 11th, just days before the Republican National Convention. Meanwhile, the prosecution's star witness, Trump's former lawyer and fixer Michael Cohen, talked about the verdict.
This has been a long time coming for accountability.
Cohen spoke with ABC's Good Morning America. We're also watching the political fallout in the nation's capital. We get that part of the story from Bloomberg's Amy Morris in Washington.
The Biden-Harris campaign released a statement saying, quote, "We saw that no one is above the law." House Speaker Mike Johnson posted on X that, quote, "Today is a shameful day in American history." Bloomberg's Megan Scully says lawmakers on Capitol Hill are all in campaign mode, and this guilty verdict is a factor.
We have tons of legislation coming to the floor that are messaging votes, things that are never going to become law, but that are good for their candidates to vote on. And I think that there will certainly be some messaging legislation targeted at supporting Donald Trump.
Bloomberg's Megan Scully on Bloomberg's Balance of Power. In Washington, Amy Morris, Bloomberg Radio.
To hit inside Russia or not? That's the question facing NATO allies as they meet in Prague. Some NATO members now back the easing of restrictions on Ukraine's use of Western weapons against targets on Russian soil. Germany's foreign minister.
We are doing everything to help Ukraine that it can defend not only its country, but its citizens.
But not all agree. Italy's representative.
It's impossible to use our weapons outside of Ukraine because we are not fighting against Russia. We are defending Ukraine. Is not the same.
And the Biden administration has made a major reversal. Ukraine is now permitted to fire U.S. weapons into Russia. NBA Finals set. It will be Dallas against Boston. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Michael Barr. Back to Paul, Lisa, and the man that can speak clean Latin, Amte
Dazzled
Inke.
it. Dazzled it. Oh, that was good. You took that from Curly. He was my professor as well. Paul, I got 8 ways to go here, but I was going to do final thoughts as we get to Helene Becker, one of our most popular guests. But I got to rip up the script. This is out on Zero Hedge. It's a Bloomberg headline. Yep. Tracy Alloway has it as well. And Chris Whalen just came out. Private credit firm 9Point halts cash payouts on 3 funds. We don't want to be inflammatory about this. Can I just say Blackstone just did a phenomenal Hawaiian hotel transaction where they like doubled their money in 3 cups of coffee. Okay. I mean, everything is so gloomy, and I don't want to be Mr. Gloomster on this, but I'm sorry, on a Friday, this gets my attention.
It gets your attention, Tom, as you think about private credit. It's a market that really developed after the great financial crisis, and now it's reported that it could be as large as $1.7 trillion in private credit. And we speak to a lot of these private credit people, Tom, and they feel very comfortable with their portfolios, with the credit quality of the portfolios, but it just, but there are some concerns out there that so much money has rushed to this asset class, and maybe not as much regulatory approval as some people would like. And I guess there are some concerns that there could be some blow-ups at some
This
point.
could be the event into the summer. I mean, this is some, I'm not anticipating it, but the 9Point, I don't know who they are in the sense of like the major players, but you just wonder if this is what's coming down the pike.
Yeah, I'm just looking at the reporting here. And,
what's your thought? I got 25 seconds, completely different. Paul, what an Nick Akerman, he left me speechless.
Yeah, exactly, because when Nick speaks about these types of events, you have to pay attention given his experience level, Tom, and he had some thoughts there.
Pay attention in an hour. We will have David Gura at Trump Tower along with all of our team with the coverage of the former President of the United States making comments here after what we saw last evening. From New York City, with the Dow up 147 points, Bloomberg surveillance.
markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
In the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo. We have stocks on the rise, bond yields falling as a cool down in the Fed's preferred inflation gauge reinforce those bets that policymakers will have a little bit more room to cut rates this year. We'll head over to the Nasdaq now, up 0.1% or 26 points at 16,763. We have the Dow up 0.2% or 106 points at 38,219, and the S&P 500 up 0.2%, 15 points at 5,250. The 2-year yield 4.89%, down 2 basis points. A 10-year yield at 4.50%. That's down 4 basis points. We have spot gold higher, $2,353 an ounce. Brent crude, $82 a barrel. What's moving the markets? Well, a lot of it has to do with retail earnings. We'll start with Gap shares. They're up 19%. You go to beauty retailer Ulta. Their shares up nearly 1% right now. Nordstrom, they were down. Right now, Nordstrom up more than 1.5%. Also making news, Bank of America. It's for a bit of a comeback. That bank now loosening restrictions on lending to the firearms and energy industries, and that's over pressure from anti-ESG politicians. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom and Paul.
Lisa Mateo, thank you so much. We thought we'd readjust. First of all, Paul Sweeney, has summer started? I mean, are we in full mode,
totally,
or are we
totally.
pretending?
Memorial Day, the first leg
days.
of the Triple Crown. Memorial Day, July 4th, and Labor Day. That's how we play.
Very good. Okay, so we're into the summer mode, which means there's only one guest we want to talk to, and that's Helene Becker, TD Cowen, and we're thrilled that she could join us today on your airline nightmare. Okay, Helene, I'm going to cut to the chase. I have 2 flights I look at. Paul knows this. I look at what's called 5756, which is United to Paris, where I've got offspring ensconced. It used to be $5,000, $6,000, $7,000 business class theft. It's now $2,579. How are the airlines reacting to the crater in pricing?
Yeah, thanks, Tom. Good to hear you again. Yeah, I mean, we expected this to happen. We talked about this in early December of 2023 when we put out a report in which we talked about increasing capacity on the North Atlantic. And that's exactly what we saw this summer. We have airlines, not so much the U.S. airlines. United is up mid-single digits, low single digits. Delta also up low to mid-single digits. American up low. But what you see from Lufthansa up 16%, Condor up more than 100%. It's a German airline, a discounting German airline. A bunch of other international airlines adding a lot of capacity on the North Atlantic, and fares only go down when that happens. And so that's why you're seeing that that opportunity. And the other thing, Tom, also to consider is the Olympics. Everybody, with air quotes around everybody, thinks that the Olympics are a big boon for airlines, and they're really not, because there are people who will look at the Olympics and say, I'm not going to Paris this year because of them. Business travelers won't go those couple of weeks. So they're not the boon people think they are, and I think that's part of it.
Yeah, well, Paul Sweeney doesn't care. He doesn't care about Paris. He's just flying around to see the Stones concerts.
Exactly. So, Helene, I'm looking at the stock prices year to date. I got United and Delta both up 25, 26%, but then I've got American down 16%. It really kind of jumps out at you. What's going on with our friends at American?
Yeah, they've had a tough time, especially this week. It's been pretty brutal. So they put a strategy in place where they're incentivizing people to book direct. And clearly that's the future for people to go on AA.com or UA.com or whatever. But the reality for American is they forgot that their most important customers were corporate customers. And as people have returned to the office, and the further we get away from 2020, the more people want to be back in the office. Bosses want you back in the office. And so the hybrid work environment is starting to fray a little bit at the edges. 4 is the new 3. Some companies want you back 5 days a week. So when you think about that, corporate travelers are coming back, and they're not going back to American. They're going back to United and Delta, because both of them do a really good job of catering to corporate travelers. and American doesn't do as good a job. And over the past year, maybe year and a half, they've gotten a little worse.
Right.
Even though their operations have gotten better, their customer service has probably deteriorated. I think that's what you're seeing there.
Helene, do we have enough pilots out there? I mean, for a while that was a thing, and a lot of young folks are saying, "Boy, I'm going to go be a pilot here." There seems to be demand.
Pilot.
Where are we on that?
Yeah, Paul, that's a great question. So yes, I think we do. In December of 2013, we wrote a report in which we said between 2014 and 2030, we would see the airline industry need to replace 27,000 pilots out of a base of 55,000. And then if you assumed 5%, somewhere between 3 and 5% average annual growth over that 15-year period, 16-year period, you would need somewhere around 38,000 pilots. And of course, we didn't forecast the pandemic. I don't know that a lot of people did, but when you think about the pilot retirements this decade, a lot of them were pulled forward to 20 and 21, and the airlines, especially the big three, have gone out and hired everybody they needed to. And then with the delays from Boeing and the lack of capacity growth because of it, airlines are finding that they don't need to hire quite as many pilots.
There have been saviors to the rescue, Helene, since World War II. Bob Crandall would say price discrimination, all the different ticket prices. In that, Paul brings up the stock performance. United Airlines, granted a pandemic got in the way, has an under 2% total return per year over the last 10 years. Their ROIC is a joke. Their EVA spread is a joke. What is the strategy to get back to profit at the airlines? I don't see it.
Yeah, the place where you have to look for it is really in the ancillary revenue and in the credit card agreements they have. So that's really where you're getting a lot of the profitability from. The ancillaries come once you get on board the plane. That's kind of where they make some money. They've eliminated change fees. That was a big contributor to revenue. So that went away, and they have to replace that revenue elsewhere. And one of the places they're doing it is through their co-brand credit card agreements. And for Delta, for an example, it's a contribution of $6.8 billion in 2023. They think by the end of the decade they can get it to $10 billion for United. They haven't disclosed it. We think it's around the same, maybe a little bit less than Delta's, but we think when they do Investor Day, they will provide more clarity on that, more transparency. But that's really the place, Tom, where you're seeing the revenue and the profits coming from, because that's a high margin.
Good luck with that, Paul. Get one more question in here. Where are you flying this weekend?
Monday I'm flying to Newark to Nashville.
Newark to Nashville.
And on United, so we'll see how that
You
goes.
Get the vegetarian meal?
Oh, of course. Yeah. No, please.
One more.
I'm not even sure
One
what I'm
more
doing.
with
Helene, talking about capacity here, where are we? Is there enough capacity out there in the marketplace?
Well, yes and no. The typical analyst answer, right? Yes, there's enough capacity for what we're seeing right now, but no, there's not enough capacity if you think about continued growth in the industry. We do about 2.5 million, 2.4 million passengers a day. That's up from about 2.3 million pre-pandemic. So we're growing, but with OEM delivery delays, with issues regarding air traffic control, we're still short 3,000 air traffic controllers that the government provided for.
Yeah, they're all at Newark. All the empty seats are at Newark. Helene, we're out of time. I don't even have time to ask you I don't have time to ask you your single best idea. We'll do that next time. It'll be some unmentionable South American airline. That's usually where she is. Helene Becker, thank you so much with TD Cowen. The heritage at TD Cowen of Kai von Rumer and Helene Becker is best in class in the airline business. Can we stop what our team put together today?
Fantastic.
Just absolutely
talk about blowing up the script.
Unbelievable. Eric said to me, I'm not coming in Monday unless you play Led Zeppelin. I said, okay. Have a great weekend, folks. Again, 11 a.m., David Gura and a former president of the United States.